Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from Pro Football Network. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, you are back from assignment from the Combine. How was Indianapolis in all of its glory?
Fine. Indianapolis was fine. Yeah, the Combine is very weird because like there are all these figures that are kind of like distanced from you in a lot of ways. Just you're covering football and it's like, well, I don't really cover the Chiefs, so I don't really encounter Andy Reid all that often, right? And like, hey, we never really get to talk to general managers, and so there's Scott Pioli, there's Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, there's all these general managers around the league. There's John Schneider, right? There's all these general managers around the league that you never really have a discussion with, and they're like really important decision makers. And so like there's that. You do it a couple of times, and like the allure of it kind of goes away for a while. And then what's really interesting is that in order to really get like good information from the Combine, you have to, and I emphasize have to. Like I know this sounds like you're complaining about something that's fun, but honestly, is that you do have to go out until like at least 2, if not 4 a.m. in the night to all these bars to like hang out with people that you really don't want to hang out with. And I want to emphasize that last part. There were a lot of people I hung out with that I really enjoy hanging out with, right? Like hanging out with all the people from like 2013 draft Twitter was phenomenal. I loved it. Hanging out with like some of the people that I hadn't caught up with in a while, a lot of the athletic people, that was really cool. Hanging out with like my editor actually was a ton of fun. Like there's a lot of people that I liked hanging out with, but there's a lot of people that you're like, you're just kind of there because it's your job. And it's so like, I didn't really think of going out as part of my job. And, as soon as I did, it made it actually easier to go out, right? Because it was just like, oh, I kind of have to, because like there's some, like I'm getting 3 hours of sleep a night, which I understand the way I've communicated my sleep schedule over the past decade is not that unusual, but I'm 34. I sleep a lot less than almost everybody my age, but I still want more than 3 hours of sleep because quarterbacks are in the morning. That's at 8 a.m. I'm at Prime 47 where they serve watered down drinks at 4 a.m. and I'm trying to get some information from somebody I'm not going to see for a year, right? And if I had a preference, I would have been in bed at midnight, right? And I would have gotten up at 6, and I would have been able to go to quarterbacks at 8, and then I would have been able to write about that. And it's weird. Going out is a job now, and it sucks. And I lose my voice every because I'm shouting over the bar to speak to somebody that I don't really care about. So that's the Combine. I had a lot of fun at the Combine, but that's just part of the experience there too. Also, we got to stop making our default dinner plan a steakhouse. Indy has so many things that are not a steakhouse. We could go somewhere. I promise you we can go somewhere else. I had so much steak and it was very good, but like, please God, I could do with Mexican food, man. Even Indianapolis Mexican food.
I realize it's Indianapolis, but can I get a taco? Like,
right.
I just need something.
Yeah, and it's just like, okay, I had prime rib yesterday. I had New York strip today. Phenomenal. I don't really need the sirloin on day 3. I don't.
When you start eyeing the salad suggestively in the steakhouse menu,
I advocated for the salad. I was actively like, all right, this salad sounds really good. And everyone else was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, we are splitting this salad. All right.
Arif gets angry at salad. More at
for
11.
Salad. Angry for salad.
Oh yes, angry for salad. Sorry, I thought this was the meme about laughing at salad for a moment. So
anyway, I very much enjoyed my India experience, but I communicate a lot of my feelings through complaint. So
yeah,
there you go.
That's Boy, if that hasn't been the case through 466
Yeah,
episodes.
right. Yeah.
And with that, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. It is, of course, the off season. The combine just wrapped up. We're going to have an interview to discuss a bit of that. We also have some Vikings news. Eric Kendricks was released. Was sad. He's been awesome on the team, but it was time for him to go. So we've got stuff to talk about there. We have some league cuts and trades to talk about, including Daniel Jones getting a deal and Saquon getting tagged, and some interesting stuff involving Lamar Jackson. So we're going to take an opportunity to go a little bit national on this. And then we also have an interview with John Ledyard about the combine stuff and the mailbag as well. But before we start, again, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like to help us financially, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go to norsecode.threadless.com and get yourself a t-shirt, get yourself a baby onesie, get yourself a nice shower curtain. The only thing you can't get is a body pillow, and we'll talk about more of that in the mailbag. So go ahead and go over to norsecode.threadless.com. You can also go to patreon.com/norsecode and donate there for $3.50 a month. You can go and get access to the Discord and get access to the bonus material that comes out. We just put out another bonus episode here a few days ago that was fantastic. That included Arif's stories about being at the Super Bowl and his hatred of Tesla stuff. So check that out. It's a really funny story about Arif at the Super Bowl. It's definitely worth checking out. You getting the best taxi driver is the story I'm referring to, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Because you forget what you say on all these shows because you talk on so many. I figured I would remind you as to what you had said when you were being recorded.
I just assumed you were accurate in describing something funny. I was like, yeah, probably. That probably happened.
I'll trust James's judgment on this, maybe.
Yeah.
What could possibly go wrong? So check it out over at patreon.com/norsecode, or you can give a one-time donation over at paypal.me/norsecode as well. All right, all shilling aside, let's get into the episode itself and talk a bit about Eric Kendricks. Eric Kendricks was a member of the squad for a number of years, was very good for a number of years. Last year was definitely an off year, but it is a wonderful thing to look at his final touchdown as a Viking and see that it was the game-winning one against the Bills.
Yeah, I mean that it's like really incredible, right? Yeah, I mean it was I shouldn't say I didn't expect it. I knew that this was like kind of in the universe of possibilities, right? But I was kind of under the impression that this wasn't necessary, and I've laid out my thoughts on this before. I thought that the primary reason that Eric Kendricks underperformed last year was because of the nature of how he underperformed and how poorly the coaching was. Like I thought this was primarily a defensive coordinator, linebackers coach issue. The Vikings just replaced both of them, right? And so I thought pretty good chance. In fact, I isolated Eric Kendricks on multiple shows, including I think this one, as one of the players most likely to benefit from this kind of scheme change, right? And so I thought that there was an understanding, and maybe I was projecting a little bit that this would all be kind of cleared up, and that maybe he would have to take a pay cut, but certainly he would stay in Minnesota and kind of help guide Brian Asamoah and kind of the next round of linebackers for the Vikings. Beyond kind of what just his on-field play provides. And he's a huge leader in the locker room. He's been just kind of a remarkable person to interact with. He's been very passionate about the things that matter a lot to him. And he's been very vocal about, making sure that like stuff like kids get fed, that we pursue social and racial justice, that we, he was big with Anthony Barr's campaign to prevent recidivism in prisons and to help single mothers. Like, it's all, stuff like, yeah, every athlete has a charity, every athlete has a cause that's close to him. But Kendricks kind of made it the reason that he was kind of becoming more of a public figure, because he doesn't like being in the public. And it was kind of cool to see him open up a lot more. The way that teammates talked about him was like really quintessentially the glue guy kind of leader, right? Where he kind of like was kind of the engine behind a lot of that locker room. So it sucks, right? That he gets cut. He referenced on his own Instagram that this was like, hey, I understand it's a business decision, but for me, it's always going to be about the game. And it was, it was pretty emotional stuff. The Vikings put out, I think, like 3 different statements about how good a leader he was or whatever. But ultimately, they made a decision that it would be either impossible to come to a number that would make it worth it having him on the roster, and that the underperformance that we saw from him last year was kind of going to be the case going forward. Um, but certainly it changes the character of the Vikings in a big way. There's not very many people on the team, especially on the defense, that have been around for very long. Like not even like 5 years ago or whatever, which is like a very typical turnover to schedule to look at, but just like very long at all. It's like Danielle Hunter and Harrison Smith, and then you're kind of running out of names at that point. Right? Like there's just not many people on the defense that have been around, and so it feels like you have to kind of get used to a very different new look kind of Vikings.
And speaking of, I mean, there's a number of cuts that we've kind of been anticipating here over the last couple of days that haven't materialized, but you get the feeling this is absolutely not the only one that's coming.
Yeah, I mean the Vikings have a lot of things that they'll have to resolve or take care of. We've talked about a number of them. They'll have to figure out what to do with Dalvin Cook's contract. That's a $14 million cap hit. It certainly seems like after gaining, I don't know if health is the right word, but after having a healthy offseason and entering the season with a degree of expectation that he'd be healthy, he also underperformed. Kind of have to figure out the reasoning for that, because the Vikings very much seem to have valued Dalvin Cook a lot and what he could do, but a $14 million cap hit is like pretty difficult. Obviously, everyone's kind of waiting on what's going to happen with Adam Thielen, right? That's been discussed a number of times. He's got like a $19.9 million or $20 million cap hit. Certainly either the way that the Vikings use him or his level of performance, whatever it is, his production, just doesn't meet that. And I don't think we could reasonably anticipate that he'd be able to meet that. If you cut him, you only save $6 million. So hopefully there's going to be a trade, but if the Vikings need to save $6 million, maybe they need to do that. Right. So, a lot of moves left to make. The ones that I wouldn't necessarily consider untouchable, but like are going to be really difficult to resolve in ways that'll help them free up room are Kirk Cousins. Obviously, he's got a pretty big dead cap number from next year. Brian O'Neill, Harrison Smith, and Zadarius Smith, all of them are pretty difficult to work around, not because of their contract status, although Kirk Cousins, yes, you would save money by cutting all of the ones that are not named Kirk Cousins, but you wouldn't cut Brian O'Neill, you wouldn't cut Harrison Smith, you probably wouldn't cut Zadarius Smith. Now, his number is built for the Vikings to restructure, right? Like it's only $3.3 million guaranteed on his contract. And so the number was essentially the Vikings gave him a deal where he'd have some guarantee that the signing bonus, but the first year salary cap was not going to be big. Then the second year they could reevaluate and build a deal around him that would necessarily be more reflective of what they got from him this last year. That's going to be kind of difficult. At a $15.5 million cap hit, they probably just want to keep it there. But Danielle Hunter has a big cap hit at $13 million. They're probably not going to do anything with that. TJ Hawkinson has a cap number of $9 million. Almost certainly the only thing that they would do with that is extend him, right? Because they got a great level of performance out of him. But they moved the void year for Dalvin Tomlinson back, so it sounds like they want to work something out with him. We'll see, right? Because technically it was supposed to void a couple of days ago in late February, but it didn't. So they moved the void year, so they're going to have to figure out something to do with him. But yeah, there's a lot of moves. There's been a lot of discussion about CJ Ham. I stated in the last show you'd save $750,000 by cutting him. That's not true. It's $3 million. So wrong about that. If you're working around the margins, I guess that would make sense. It really depends on if you see the value in that fullback offense. There's a discussion in the last episode about kind of the football side of that if you want to hear it. But yeah, there's going to be kind of a lot of things coming down the pipeline. It's outside of the players I just discussed. Jordan Hicks is the only one where you'd save probably more than $3 million cutting him. And so he's somebody that you take a look at to change their deal. But yeah, there's going to have to be some moves made if they want to I mean, because they're negative in cap right now. They're negative 24.9. They're negative 25 essentially. And that could be resolved, but they need to be proactive about it because the deadline's on March 16th.
It gets the feeling like it's absolutely not going to be the only chip to fall, but there's a number of people on this defense that you're not going to recognize moving forward, which could be a very good thing considering how atrocious the defense has been. But
but there's a lot of uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
We don't know if the cornerback they're going to draft is going to be any good, right? We don't know if and we've been writing off like Andrew Booth and stuff like that and Lewis Cine and maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't, but we have no idea if they're going to be good. That's for sure. They certainly haven't been yet. Lewis Cine hasn't seen the field, and then he got injured really early, so he'd be unable to see the field those first 4 games. He was on the bench and he wasn't getting any playing time in training camp, and so you've got some questions about that. But presumably, Andrew Booth and Lewis Cine will play a significant role in the defense, right? The first and second round pick. And if not, it's going to be different unfamiliar names, right? They're probably not going to bring Patrick Peterson back. And so what do you do at corner? What do you do at linebacker, right? Because Brian Asamoah is going to be one of the stars. The other one, Jordan Hicks, he was the worst of the 2 linebackers last year. Are we confident about that? Is that going to be the deal? Like, are they going to keep Jordan? Are they going to draft somebody? Like, I don't know. It's going to be a really substantially different Vikings defense. And I think we've gotten really used to the continuity from the Zimmer era because it was an unusual amount of it, right? There were years where the 11 starters that at the beginning that year were also the 11 starters at the beginning of the previous year, right? And there was a really small amount of turnover until there wasn't. And then there was an enormous amount of turnover where you had 9 new starters, right? And then things that kind of started to shift. But like there was a solid 5-year stretch where only 1 or 2 guys would change. Like, oh, well, you lose Tom Johnson, you add Sheldon Richardson, I guess. Like that, and that's the change that you have to get used to. But now it's like, the linebackers are gone, the corners are gone, one of the safeties might be gone, certainly the defensive tackles, that there might be gone. And it's just like, okay, I don't know any of these guys.
So why is it that the Vikings appear to have to pay their credit card when it comes to the salary cap, but people like the Saints can just keep writing checks?
I don't know what it is about the Saints. They're very close in proximity to a voodoo community. Maybe that'll play a role in that. The Saints right now are also $25 million over the cap.
By the way, if you say something like that, we will get questions on it. So just a reminder to not drop.
I didn't. That was just like a joke. It's like
like
a New Orleans.
That's how it all started. That's how it all started.
I don't. I'm gonna blame you. There's not even.
Oh, I didn't say anything about it. I didn't say anything about a voodoo priestess named Phyllis. No.
I didn't say anything like that. What are you talking about? Anyway, that was very specific, James. Right now, Derek Carr only costs $7 million against the cap. They've got, I guess, 11 days or whatever or I guess like 8 days, really. 8 days to figure this out. They got a couple of big cap hits. I don't know, man. It's the Saints. They figure it out. Sometimes it means cutting an all-pro tackle like Teron Armstead and looking for change behind the couch cushion, so cutting your punter. Sometimes it just means extending your $60 million quarterback into perpetuity and taking a cap hit in 2025 for retirement in 2022 somehow.
I love the fact that they're tight end, but not quarterback, but kind of quarterback, but mostly tight end. Taysom Hill is now officially, like, that experiment's done.
Yeah, and if they cut him today, they would have a $17 million net negative on their cap. They gave him so much guaranteed money, man.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's
like he cost $7 million against the cap right now, and if they cut him, they would incur a $24 million cap hit.
It's unreal.
Good work.
Well, we covered his contract when it first happened. We were like, this is one of the dumbest contracts in sports. And then Deshaun Watson comes out and says, watch this. But
and he screwed the whole league. And
Well, let's talk about the league. Let's move national for a moment because a number of things happened over the last 24 hours that are worth discussing. I mean, Daniel Jones had one really great game. It happened to be in a playoff game against one of the worst defenses to ever make it to the playoffs, and he got paid, and Saquon got tagged.
Yeah, so it's going to be one or the other, right? Like Saquon Barkley was going to get paid, and then Daniel Jones would get tagged, or vice versa. Or the Daniel Jones tag would make it impossible for them to sign Saquon, and then he'd hit free agency, and then, and then what, right? But they were able to finally work out a deal with Daniel Jones, which allows them to franchise tag Saquon Barkley, which means that they might be able to work out a long-term deal. But the thing that's interesting is that Daniel Jones got a $40 million average contract, but it's a very front-loaded contract, and so the Giants did not really commit to Daniel Jones in the way that I think he wanted, which is why it took so long. So it's a 4-year, $160 million contract. If you include all the incentives, which presumably include winning the Super Bowl, being an All-Pro, it's like that would be pretty tough, right? It would be $195 million over 4 years. But the thing is, the first 2 years of the deal are $82 million. The last 2 years of the deal are $78 million, right? $94 million is quote unquote virtually guaranteed at signing, according to Ian Rappaport, which tells us that only the first 2 years are essentially guaranteed, right? His first year cap number is $19 million. It could have been lower. It's not, because a lot of that is in first year roster bonus and first year salary instead of a signing bonus that kicks it down the road. So it's a 2-year deal. But it's a $40 million deal, right? Like that's the interesting thing about it, right? He's going to get $82 million over the first 2 years, which means he's getting, at least in cash. I don't know if $82 million over the first 2 years is cap hit over the first 2 years, or if it's cash he receives over the first 2 years. Those are different because of the signing bonus calculation. We've talked about that in a couple of episodes, but you don't feel the accounting pain of that until later because it's spread out, is the idea. But that's all that's guaranteed. And so, they'll reassess, but still $40 million in cash per year over the first 2 years. That's an interesting middle class of quarterbacks, because I put out a tweet about a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, asking who do you think gets paid more? Is it Daniel Jones, Jimmy Garoppolo, Derek Carr, or Geno Smith? Because they all have like these different questions, right? Because Geno Smith was the most efficient quarterback out of that group. Daniel Jones probably has the most upside. He's certainly the youngest out of that group. Derek Carr has had probably the best career so far, and he's had the best individual season. That was under John Gruden. And Jimmy Garoppolo has accomplished the most. If we're judging quarterbacks by wins, then Jimmy Garoppolo comes out ahead. So they all have like an argument for it. And Daniel Jones, I thought, was kind of the weakest argument. He came in second in the poll for who's going to get the highest average annual value. And, that wasn't necessarily correct. That like he should have been first in the poll because he got the most, because Derek Carr got 37.5. Carr's deal is also only like 2 years functionally with the Saints. And they can choose to let go. Geno Smith's deal with the Seahawks is functionally 2 years, right? And so there's not a lot guaranteed in those contracts, but the number is high. If you take a look, I looked at this in an article for Pro Football Network. If you take a look at it from like 10 years ago, so this right now consumes about 17, 18, 19% of the cap, right? And so let's say 18% of the cap in 2023. In 2014, 2013, this quote unquote middle class of quarterbacks, where you're stuck between definitely a starter and definitely a franchise guy, somewhere in between those two things, like a starting quality, but not quite franchise guy. Depending on how you define that, further down the road, that's like a Jay Cutler, that's like a Matt Schaub, that's, some of those guys were getting Michael Vick, right? It's after the whole thing where he had a great season in 2010. Those guys that are probably there are consuming 7%. If you're taking a look at, I guess Matt Schaub was closer to 15 million. If you're taking a look at Matt Schaub and Eli Manning, where it's like, well, these guys are definitely starters and we're going to talk about them like they're franchise guys, but we're not going to treat them like they're franchise guys. Like Eli Manning has won his 2 Super Bowls and his current average annual salary is like 17 million. Nothing like, the Aaron Rodgers and the Ben Roethlisbergers and the Phillip Rivers or even the Matt Ryans, right? Nothing close to that. And that was still 13% of the cap. Right now we're talking about quarterbacks, Derek Carr, Daniel Jones, Geno Smith, kind of in that category, that are 17% of the cap. And so they're just consuming much more of the cap, and it's just kind of part of the changing league landscape. Some of that has to do with the decreasing value of nose tackles and running backs. Some of it has to do with the increasing value of passing generally, but also quarterbacks aren't hitting the market. I think that has something to do with it as well.
It is kind of ridiculous that of all things, and we'll transition into this, I suppose, the amount of money that he's making this year, and Lamar Jackson got tagged.
Yeah, so Daniel Jones is getting $40 million over 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Lamar Jackson's tag is a non-exclusive franchise tag. We'll talk about all of the kind of things behind that. That is about $32.4 million, the non-exclusive franchise tag. The exclusive franchise tag, which does not allow him to seek out a contract in free agency and locks him into that one team if he signs the tender, we don't know what the number is because that number doesn't come out until April, but it would probably be around $45 million. Right. But the non-exclusive franchise tag is about $32.4 million. If he gets tagged again next year, the non-exclusive franchise tag level, that is either 120% of his current money, $32.4 million, or the top 5 of the NFL quarterbacks at that, like, or whatever, however they calculate the franchise tag level that they did this year, whichever is higher. And that would be $38 million if it's 120%. And I would imagine that would be the higher number. It usually is. That means over 2 years, he gets $70 million non-guaranteed because it's essentially a rolling guarantee. So if he gets hurt this season, he doesn't get the contract next year. So he's getting paid essentially $35 million with only 1 year of it guaranteed a year, while Daniel Jones gets 40 over 2 years. Geno Smith gets 35 and Derek Carr gets 37.5. And they've got better guarantees. Lamar Jackson, an MVP quality player, is getting $35 million a year without those guarantees. That's how screwed up the franchise tag system is in the NFL.
It's pretty ridiculous. And there was a clip that's been going around about that involves Bomani Jones talking about the importance of having an agent. And it really should be stressed here that he should probably have an agent.
Yeah, we've talked about it a couple of times on this podcast before, and Bomani hits on some of the aspects that I've talked about on the podcast before, that an agent is very familiar with all of the elements of an NFL contract that might trip you up. There's one thing with guaranteed for injury, guaranteed in general, rolling guarantees. And, maybe Jackson has, availed himself of all of that contract language and is somewhat familiar with it. But there's details on details on details, like when a contract vests, when is it going to be best for a rolling guarantee to vest? When is it going to be best for a void to kind of hit at what point in the league year? Because if a team thinks, hey, it's best if that rolling guarantee kicks in 5 days after the start of free agency, an agent might think, actually, it's probably best if it kicks in 5 days before free agency, because you have to make a decision before you know what's going to be on the market, and you're more likely to make the decision to keep my client on the roster. These are and again, I don't think that these individual details he might be aware of, the ones that I mentioned, but there's dozens and dozens and dozens of these individual details, right? And clauses that you might not be like. We learned about the Arizona Cardinals clause, the homework clause that was in the Cardinals contract that got taken out. But there are all these clauses that are non-standard in negotiating language that you might not have an understanding of how that plays out 3, 4, 5 years down the road. That was what we talked about. But Bomani puts it in much, as he always does, in much simpler and more succinct terms, which is you're negotiating a contract that day, right? An agent is negotiating a contract every day because that's his job. He's an expert at it, or she, right? They're experts at it, right? They know what they're doing when they're negotiating contracts, and they kind of enjoy it, right? You've negotiated a contract once in your life. This is what Bomani was saying. You've negotiated a contract once in your life. And I wanted to point out, it's like when you yell at the TV, right? I wanted to point out Like, yeah, and that was the easiest contract in the world to negotiate because the terms are so limited, right? Because it's a rookie contract. The amount of money is slotted. You don't have to negotiate over that. It's about how much you're guaranteed. And he's a quarterback picked in the first round. Mind you, 32nd, but a quarterback picked in the first round. It's going to be fully guaranteed. The question is whether or not you want offsets. And you're probably going to be fine either way, but you're probably, as a quarterback, even at 32, not going to have to worry about an offsets clause, which again, offsets clause, that's another thing you have to be familiar with, right? About how your guaranteed money vests, because if another team pays you, now you're no longer getting paid the guaranteed money because you didn't negotiate the offsets correctly, right? So it's about that. But he also brought up something that Eric DeCosta brought up at his presser, right? So someone asked him, I think it was actually my editor, Adam Beasley, asked him, Eric DeCosta, what is the difficulty with negotiating a player versus negotiating with an agent? Bomani has basically the player side version of that question. We're going to put that clip in the show notes. I don't want to repeat everything that Bomani said. I just encourage you to watch it. It's like a minute long. It's really good. But what DeCosta said at the combine was like, look, as a general manager, you're going to say some stuff that might make a player mad. And what he's trying to say, and he's trying to be very delicate about it because he's in the middle of a negotiation. He doesn't want to functionally what he is saying is you're going to insult the player. You're going to try to diminish their value as much as possible. And in order to do that, it's best not to have the player in the room, because if that happens, now a player has heard all your insults and is now on your team in your locker room leading your team, right? And you don't want a player to be resentful for you. Like, you do all that to diminish their value, and now you've saved a couple $1 million or whatever. And is that what a couple $1 million worth it for having a sour player that no longer has a good relationship with you? Probably not. And so you have to dance around these issues. It's very difficult to be very harsh about a player. Again, I'm paraphrasing what he is saying. He functionally said it's really difficult to dig into all of the realities of it because when you're talking to a player, you might dig at some of the weaknesses in order to really bring up some concerns you have about bringing in more money or something like that. But what he's basically saying is you need to be able to diminish the value of the product you're buying in order to buy it at the best possible price, right? And that is an interesting point, right? Like, Lamar is bringing Lamar into the room. And the problem is he also has to bring Lamar out of the room. There is no keeping all of that stuff in there, right? And that's like an important element of it too. And the conversation that people have about this is really interesting. Somebody was arguing with Quincy Avery, who has a lot of history training quarterbacks, trained like Justin Fields and Deshaun Watson, and I don't think Lamar, but a number of other quarterbacks, Joshua Dobbs. While I do have like concerns about the way that he does commentary about Deshaun Watson, he has a relationship with him, right? Like, it is true that he's probably more familiar with all of the things involved with this process than like a random person. Random people were telling him, I don't want an agent, taking 10 to 30% of my contract. And it's like, do you think that's what agents take? Why are we having this discussion if that's what you think? You don't know. And that's definitely not true. It's like 2.5%. Are you kidding me? 10%, 30%? People are having this discussion without an understanding of how much agents take. It's like 2.5%. And that seems like worth it to me, because the value of having an agent is not just that you will probably get more than 2.5% back than if you were to negotiate it, right? You're probably making more money without that agent because that agent is doing the negotiating for you. The deal gets done sooner. There's less stress in your life. There's probably more security because the guarantees are structured in a way that'll help you. You'll be able to secure some things that are really important to you that maybe you didn't think about because the agent knew what questions to ask you about what you wanted. The agent gets to think about things like income tax rates, gets to think about things like, the accrual of interest and escrow, whether or not you should get your signing bonus paid out now rather than later. Your agent knows about a lot of things that they can ask you questions about, but you may not have had the thought that you should ask these questions, right? Like, do I want my signing bonus in escrow and then paid out to me over time, or do I want my signing bonus all at once? Well, if I invest my signing bonus, if that's something I'm going to do, maybe I can get a 7% return. If it's in escrow, the team gets to make interest off of it. Or if it's in trust, the interest might be 2.5%. And I have to make all of these decisions, right? The agent can walk you through that and then go into the meeting with understanding what your priorities are, right? Like if I want that signing bonus to buy my mom a house, I want more of that to come now. If I want that signing bonus to secure college tuition for my kids, I want that bonus now. But if I want that signing bonus to grow, maybe I want it now, maybe I don't, right? And so all of those things are part of the reason that you would have an agent. And it takes the stress off. Like the agent gets to negotiate the contract in week 5. You don't. You've got a game to prepare for. So you can come out with a solution in agreement during training camp when you're training, or during week 5, or during week 8, or during week 11. While you're trying to win on the field, the agent has hammered out all the details so you can sign it in week 12, right? That's worth 2.5% for almost every player. But on top of that, you will also get more than the 2.5% difference in the fee. Like that is, there's a couple of players that have negotiated contracts on their own. Richard Sherman's one of them. That offensive tackle who used to play for the Seahawks, forget his name. He was one of them. He's a huge crypto bro. But there's like a reason that this is not typical, and it's because you're good at what you're good at. Let someone else be good at what they're good at. Anyway, all of this has magnified an additional problem.
So it looks like a number of teams have said publicly they are not going to pursue Lamar Jackson, which, considering their quarterback situations, for the most part, doesn't exactly make sense why they wouldn't. Because you've heard previous GMs in the past go, listen, no player is untradeable. We'll look at every potential option, every potential deal. These teams are just flat out saying we're not doing it. That seems short-sighted, or it seems like something else is going on.
Yeah, that is very weird. So 5 teams, as far as I know, have said that they're publicly have said or have leaked or whatever, said they're not interested. The Atlanta Falcons, the Las Vegas Raiders, the Carolina Panthers, the Washington Commanders, and the Miami Dolphins, right? And some of these make sense to me, right? Like something like the Las Vegas Raiders, if Lamar Jackson is seeking a very high percentage of guaranteed, it sounded like he wanted something fully guaranteed, and certainly the NFLPA has been kind of pushing him to try and establish that as a precedent rather than as an aberration with Deshaun Watson. We can talk about that in a second too. If he wants a higher percentage guaranteed, the Raiders very famously have a cash flow problem. The way the guaranteed contracts work in the NFL is that as soon as you sign the contract, an NFL team must put that money into escrow. They must have all of that money on hand and allow them to, if the team collapses, right? If the league folds, if the owner runs out of money, that guaranteed money will already be there for the player. It's not going to impact that guaranteed money. So if a team folds, typically there's no recourse for a player to get the salary that was owed them. But with any guaranteed money, as per the CBA, a team must have that money available in a separate account, and it would be untouched by the team's finances and so on, right? The Raiders don't have that kind of cash flow. If Deshaun Watson wants a 5-year, $250 million contract that's fully guaranteed, the Raiders would have to have $250 million on hand. And I know a lot of people think that a lot of these NFL teams have all kinds of cash, and a lot of them do, and a lot of them don't. And I was talking about this on Twitter. Yeah, the teams are all owned by billionaires, mostly. It's not 30. I don't like Mark Davis is probably a billionaire, but the point really is that billionaires aren't always cash rich. They're often just asset rich. They have $1 billion in net worth. They can leverage their assets to get access to cash, right? Very often in the form of loans, and they'll have to secure those loans, usually in the form of a collateral, right? Like when Elon Musk bought Twitter, and it's not a one-to-one thing. Twitter cost $44 billion at the time. And Deshaun Watson cost $250 million. They're different stratospheres, right? Just a completely different arena of money. But Elon Musk financed almost all of it, right? He just didn't have the cash on hand to buy Twitter. That's fine. At the time, he was considered to be the richest person on the planet. There's no real way to calculate that because it's based on assets. But he borrowed for it, and he leveraged Tesla stock for it. And what's interesting about that is that Tesla stock tanked for a number of reasons. Some of them have to do with Elon and Twitter. Some of them don't, right? And now there's a question about whether or not his loans are properly secured, right? And that's just a thing you have to worry about. And if you don't have cash liquid, you cannot offer that kind of guaranteed money. That's why the Bengals and the Raiders are the two kind of quintessential teams. This occurs a lot more with legacy teams like the Bengals, like the Raiders, like the Steelers and the Giants, with the less so them. But teams that where the owners got rich by owning a team. That's their whole thing, right? The reason they're billionaires is because the asset they have, the team, is worth $2 to $4 billion, maybe $6 billion, right? That's why you're a billionaire. But you can't use that asset value to generate money. Like, you can't, like, a lot of these, like, you can't go to the bank and say, hey, I'm going to give the bank a share of my team, or as collateral, offer up a share of my team in order to get money. Because if you can't pay that loan back, now the bank owns the team. And the NFL never agreed to that sale, right? And so you can't do that for a lot of these. You don't have access to the cash. So I understand the Raiders, right? The Dolphins, I guess I understand too. They could just be committed to Tua, right? Tua Tagovailoa had a really great season. The injury concerns are a concern. They talked to some medical experts. The medical experts say those concussions are not more likely to occur next year because he's had a full offseason of recovery and rest, and you didn't play him in the playoffs, right? So he's going to recover. He's going to be not any more likely to get a concussion than he was before all of this debacle, even though he had 2, maybe 3 ? Concussions during the season. Again, that first one was that a lot of people are calling concussion, was ruled a back injury. So officially, I can't say that was a concussion, but who knows? But he's not more likely. We're committed to Tua. He was very efficient. No reason for us to give up because this is the non-exclusive franchise tag. Teams negotiate with Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson chooses one team based off of that negotiation, provides that offer sheet to the Ravens. The Ravens have an opportunity to match. If the Ravens do not match, if it's too expensive for them, if they don't like the terms, they don't like the payout schedule, whatever, if they don't match, the other team, Lamar Jackson signs to the other team. That other team provides 2 first-round picks as compensation to the Ravens, right? The Miami Dolphins probably don't think the upgrade between Tua Tagovailoa and Lamar Jackson is worth 2 first-round picks plus that extension, right? Plus, they'd probably have to trade Tua, which he is at the trough of his value right now. You're not going to get as much for him now as you are probably in week 3 of the season if he's healthy, right? And so he's at the lowest point of his value. So they probably can. So the Dolphins, I understand. The Raiders, I understand, although that is kind of a sad state of affairs for the Raiders. The Panthers, I don't get at all. They hosted Derek Carr, right? Like they are 100% very willing and comfortable signing a veteran quarterback. They've got Frank Reich. That's all he's ever done is have veteran quarterbacks, right? The Panthers, I don't understand at all. The Falcons, I don't really understand. Oh, I should also mention with the Dolphins, they don't have a first-round pick this year, so that plays a role, although it's just 2. I think it's just 2 first-round picks. So they could just the next 2 that they get, right? But the Falcons, I don't understand. Is your 3rd-round quarterback really like if you just asked a GM in a vacuum, would you rather have Desmond Ridder and your first-round pick this year and first-round pick next year, or Lamar Jackson without those first-round picks and it costs you more? It costs $30 million against the cap, $40 million against the cap. The GM's going to choose that second option because the difference between Lamar Jackson and the 3rd-round guy that didn't even get playing time until the end of the season is vast. It's a gulf. The goal of the NFL is not to be the most efficient in terms of money. It's to win games, right? And Lamar Jackson wins games. So I don't know what's up with the Falcons. I don't know what's up with the Panthers. I don't know what's up with the Commanders. They certainly, like, Dan Snyder knows how to cheat money. He knows how to get cash somehow.
Well,
right? Like,
I mean,
famously,
and like the feds are looking into that. Famously,
yeah, but he'll have it. He has the cash. Now, how he got the cash, big question mark. But, they can do it, right? And so why those teams said no is interesting. Now, if teams don't want to offer him a fully guaranteed contract, I get that. But, like, they all said no within minutes of the report, right? And the Falcons retweeted it. Like, the Falcons' official account retweeted the say no thing, right? That they're not interested. You're not even gonna like host him, talk to him, reach out to him. If 3 teams reach out to him and say, we can't offer you a fully guaranteed contract, and then the Ravens say we can't offer you a fully guaranteed contract, literally, what is he gonna do? Like, I would love for NFL players all to get fully guaranteed contracts, despite the escrow hurdle that I mentioned. But like, he has to pick one of those 4 teams, right? Like, that's it. That's the closest thing to free agency he'll have. And so if none of them negotiate with him, then what? Like, they could all just host him and talk to him and say, this is what we're going to offer. If you don't want it, that's fine, right? But we're not going to pay you a fully guaranteed contract and 2 first-round picks, right? I mean, and by the way, that's one of the issues with the non-exclusive franchise tag is that the 2 first-round picks that are associated with it decrease the player's value because teams don't want to give up that much, and so the market for the player is lower. So the average annual value they'll be able to get is lower because teams will have to pay more. There's an additional cost to acquiring you, right? But yeah, if those teams don't even like, that's funky. That's crazy. I don't like it. And legally, it is probably not provably collusion. But boy, does it feel like it, because I think it's actually Ravens owner, Steve Bisciotti, I think that's how you say his name, said, yeah, we can't keep doing Deshaun Watson contracts. And it very much feels like there's a couple of things at play here. 1, the agent problem I mentioned. 2, the escrow thing I mentioned, right? With the guaranteed problem, money problem. 3, the Deshaun Watson thing. I think that the league wants to set an example of making sure that that a high percentage guarantees does not become the norm, right? Because like obviously guaranteeing money as an owner is a bad move for you versus labor, right? Labor wants the money guaranteed. They want to win that, right? So that's the third thing. A fourth thing could be they don't want to set a precedent that it makes sense for players to force their way into free agency, right? They don't want to reward that kind of behavior. And that only makes sense if all of them hold the line, as it were, if none of them kind of break rank and decide to actually talk to him. But it very much feels like all of those things are in play. They want to make sure that all the players understand that this guaranteed contract thing, don't expect it. You can get a Kirk Cousins guaranteed contract, but you cannot get a Deshaun Watson guaranteed contract. And Kirk Cousins' guaranteed contract is like 3 years. It's only ever 3 years. 3 years and 2 years. Those are his guaranteed contracts. It's not 5, 6, 7 years. Like Patrick Mahomes got a decade-long deal. It's not fully guaranteed. And if his contract isn't fully guaranteed, besides Deshaun Watson, no one's is, right? And so I think that's playing a role, is that they want to send a message to the rest of the players around the league that they don't want you to fight for it. They don't want you to get guaranteed money. They don't want to deal with a player who doesn't have an agent, all of that. And it very much feels like there is some level of cooperation going on that would rise to the level of a labor rights violation. Would you have the ability to prove it in court? And I don't think they are, in the legal sense of the term, colluding. I don't think they're talking to each other. I don't think they're sending text messages to each other or talking over the phone, or even, probably smarter, talking in person about it. I don't think that they've done that. I think that they all kind of understand this to be the case. So does this sound conspiratorial? Yeah, I guess. If you look at the history of labor relations in the United States, it definitely feels a lot more possible understanding that history. But even if it's not the case, kind of nuts, man. Lamar Jackson is definitely, and some people are like, well, nobody wants to give up 2 first-round picks for a guy who hasn't even finished his last 2 seasons. Like, they don't? Really?
Yeah, we saw a lot of terrible quarterback play. Hell, we saw San Francisco run out of starters at one point. Like, you can't tell me that Lamar isn't going to be useful somewhere.
Yeah, Carson Palmer was traded for 2 first-round picks, right? And at the time, he was a Pro Bowl quarterback. He was not the MVP quality quarterback that he turned out to be later in Arizona with the Bruce Arians. He was a Pro Bowl quarterback that was threatening to retire and then did retire, right? And he was traded for 2 first-round picks. You tell me that like a unanimous MVP isn't? Like he missed a couple of games. That's certainly a concern, right? Absolutely. Right? But like Andrew Luck missed a ton of games. You think NFL GMs weren't going to trade 2 first-round picks for him if the Colts offered? Absolutely, they would have. That's crazy. Like, you have a, I don't know, 30% shot of making a Super Bowl. And the 70% where you don't make the Super Bowl, some of that includes the injuries, right? Any team's going to trade 2 first-round picks for that. That's nuts to me. Yeah, he got injured a couple of times. So did Matthew Stafford at the beginning of his career. He got traded for a first-round pick and Jared Goff, right? Like,
and the Lions are in a very interesting spot coming up with the draft.
Yeah. So, like, that is wild to me. Yeah, the injuries are a concern, certainly. That's one reason why the high percentage of guarantees is not going to be probably a reality for him.
Yeah.
But, like, San Francisco traded up a bunch of first-round picks for a guy who only threw 400 passes in high school and college.
This whole thing stinks. There's something odd. And I say that as somebody who enjoys Lamar Jackson, and maybe that's what's coloring my commentary on it. But something feels off here.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, just a quick list of some tags. Tony Pollard got tagged. Evan Ingram, Daron Payne, Josh Jacobs. Tony Pollard getting tagged seemed like it was absolutely just going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, very much like there wasn't any real discussion about like how that contract was being negotiated going forward. It very much felt like he was going to be tagged or let go. Then we're going to sign him to a long-term deal. But yeah, I mean, it felt kind of inevitable. It's a pretty high price to pay for a guy that is kind of your second back, but he should be their first back. So, it's probably an L for Zeke, I guess.
Yeah, his contract looks worse and worse every year.
Yeah, it really does. It's the second running back contract thing again. The Christian McCaffrey one is the only one right now that looks all right, and they still traded him. So, like,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just like let San Francisco deal with it.
Yeah.
They'll be fine. Well, let's go to an interview that Arif conducted earlier today with John Ledyard of Audibles and Analytics, and they're going to talk a bit about everything that was happening over at the Combine. So with that, let's go to an interview that Arif conducted earlier today.
All right, I'm here with Jonathan Ledyard. Not sure why. He used to do scouting, is my understanding. He used to talk and write and read. Well, he doesn't know how to read.
Yeah,
and watch football, and that's why he's here. I mean, no, he used to do scouting with the Draft Network. He wrote for Pewter Report. He's a friend of mine. How you doing, man?
I'm good. You call me Jonathan, so I already know this podcast is going to be pretty rough, but we're going to go for it anyway. I'm excited about it.
It
is my real name.
I only call you by your last name, so it's saying even John. That didn't come out naturally just now. It's tough.
Yeah. You're trying to give me like a little bit of like credibility now that I'm like a retired, washed up, barely even watching tape type of dude, kind of Michael Kiske like in that way. But yeah,
you're the most in shape, washed up person I've ever seen.
That's it. That's all I've going for me though. In terms of the actual like requirements needed to do this podcast well and evaluate players, like I'm past my prime.
That's okay. You're still more qualified than half our guests. Shout out to Justice.
Oh, nice. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. So you're here to talk about draft prospects, most of whom you haven't watched in the NFL Combine, which you've consumed presumably via Twitter.
Well, that and TV. Yeah. Which actually is pretty much how we consume it when we're there in person.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But oh well. Yeah. Enjoyed it honestly so far. I've kind of, didn't really watch or pay attention to hardly any college football in season. And so it was really a process for me that started pretty much after. Like, I obviously knew the big names. I watched the college football playoff games, some of the bowl games, some of the bigger games during the year, but not anywhere close to what we watch in terms of NFL content consuming that way. So I have pretty clean slate on these guys coming in to this class. And so like didn't have many priors. And so just jumped in and don't even know many of the narratives surrounding some of them. And so I've been kind of just jumping into evaluations and ranking guys, and then finding out at the combine is always like a blitz of, oh, people like this guy like this much. And now they hate him and stuff like that I didn't even know about. Like, so
you're not caught up on the narrative surrounding some of these guys.
I might be now after this past week a little more caught up.
I was going to say, have you heard of Jalen Carter? He's been in the news.
He sounds familiar to me. Yeah. Is he one of the top quarterbacks in this class for Alabama? Boy. Is he like 5'7" for Alabama guy?
Yeah. No, yeah, you got it.
Okay. All right.
We're off to a start. Now, before we talk about like some of the individual workouts and some of the players that kind of caught my eye or might have caught your eye, I just kind of want to get a sense of, because I view the combine, I think, as a little bit more important than a lot of people do. I kind of want to get a sense of your view of kind of the workouts and the testing and kind of what information it provides us and whether or not it provides a useful tool for us, at least here on the outside.
I think it's extremely useful, critical part of evaluations, and we could obviously dive deep into what sorts of things we look at different positions, different testing results, which positions length matters the most at. I think it matters a lot for a lot of different positions. I think it's probably one of the most overlooked things. But I think in general, like, yeah, which positions does it matter the most at? There's lots of different ways to look at the data and the nitty gritty of it. But to me, I take it all pretty seriously, because especially as disqualifiers, looking at large sample sizes, going back to recorded combine history of what we have, especially last like 20 to 25 year range, and seeing that, oh, this is the success rate for tight ends that run a 4.9, and this is what they look like. These are the top players, the guys have started the most games or had the most career production that have ever run a 4.9 at the combine. And here's your best name. This guy is basically Lee Smith. And so like, that's your best career path, is probably Lee Smith. Do you think he's going to be a blocker like that? Okay, no, take him off your board. Like, so eliminating players from your board, I think is a really critical part of draft evaluation. And we need to look for tools to do that. I know that doesn't really get people excited and feeling all warm and fuzzy inside, but the reality is most of the players we scout will not be good. And the sooner people accept that and embrace that and are comfortable with that, the better they'll be as evaluators, because they'll approach it pretty critically, I think. And I think that is a huge part of evaluation, is just how much can we apply like disqualifiers to players. Every player you watch on tape, I think you should be hoping that they prove to you that they're worthy of being drafted, rather than saying, oh, let's see if if there's anything about this player that like is, could move them down the board for me. They should be proving that they should be on the board too. I think when you watch players, it should be that kind of like process.
That's kind of like the opposite of Josh Norris's approach, right? Where he refuses, almost as like a philosophical maxim, to attempt to disqualify players, because he hates looking at what players can't do, only what they can do, which sounds like really nice, right? It sounds like, well, I could just find a role for this player. I could just figure out kind of, but I mean, like if you're a cornerback that runs a 4.6, right? Like what can you do? Like you're great at covering, these short routes, but at some point, unless you want your defense to run the same coverage every single play, I mean, you're going to ask them to run deep, right? So
right.
It feels like there is some element of, hey, a lot of these guys are not going to pan out. We want to find the best system fits. We want to be able to take care of them. We want to be able to put them in places to succeed. But if they can't do something, that limits us as a team, right? So the combine is kind of a critical tool to that effect. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think to go to what Josh said, and I love Josh, but I've pushed. He's not the only person that said that, but there's just a lot of people that have operate from that mantra, and I think that's a good mantra. Like, tell me what a player can do, not what he can't do. But it's a better mantra for a coach than it is for an evaluator. A coach, once you're in the building, tell me what he can do. Like, this is what I have to work with. I need to figure out the best way to possibly utilize the resources that have been given to me and the assets that have been given to me and the players that are on my roster. That's the way a coach should approach it. An NFL GM that approaches it that way, I can't even take you seriously. Like you said, if you're a 4-6 corner, tell me what he can do. Why? Why would I waste time telling you what I can do when he's not going to make it? Like, he's just, the percentage chance he makes it is astronomically low, and we're wasting our time. It's like we're finding nice ways to say that a player sucks. Like, we just got to be able to say it and move on. Like, and if, guess what? If that 4-6 corner becomes like the third 4-6 corner in the last 20 years to be good, to be starter worthy caliber player, hats off to him. Like, way to be an outlier.
Yeah, we love our Josh Normans, don't we?
What's that?
We love our Josh Normans, don't we?
Exactly. But like, I'm not betting on that, like, especially in the range that some of these players, get evaluated in that are up against that. So I think for me, I understand the idea of telling me what a player can do. And there is some truth to it and some value to it to a degree. But once we found a disqualifier, we need to be able to lean into it and take players off our board and move players down our boards and adjust for value accordingly. Because I can tell you what a player can do well if you would like me to, but I can also tell you at the end of all that not going to be valuable enough to move the needle in the NFL. And that's really what we should be looking for in the draft. So I think it's a better mantra for a coach than for a GM. A GM should be looking for players to prove themselves for why should I be interested in you as a prospect. I think if you approach the draft that way, people would miss on a lot less prospects. Right now, you have people submit these boards every year for the draft, and you see this, and they have got, 110, 100, 120 guys in their like first 3 rounds, picks, and you got, they got starters in the 4th round. I'm like, this guy could be a starter. I'm like, what? Why you have him in the 4th round then? Like, people aren't drafting starters in the 4th round. I mean, they're everybody's trying to, but like the percentage of players driving the 4th round, there's not many starters there. So if you think he's a starter, don't put him in the 4th round. And it just feels like a lot of hedging going on with draft grading. And so anyway,
now, but no. This is a safe space for ranting. I'll add one thing. Having seen all these, like, being the board expert, which is a very niche thing to be an expert.
That's incredible.
You kind of keep in mind is that a lot of evaluators, I mean, I get, 1,000-player boards sometimes, which is fantastic. It's really good from a data perspective to have that.
But enough about Emory Hunt.
That was actually a reference to our lads. But yeah, Emory Hunt does have some pretty expansive. Well, because Emory will like plumb the depths of like NAIA and find like 8 guys that are like, this is an NFL dude. And you're like, love you, man.
The hustle is incredible.
But I love Emory. It's just it's very amusing sometimes, kind of seeing what emerges from that kind of approach. But our lads has like 1,000-player boards. I know that some of these other scouting services that I use will eventually have like 800, 900 player. I know NFL Draft Buzz now has an insanely expansive board that's like really difficult to get a handle on. One thing that's interesting is that when you contrast this to team boards, teams don't. Their job is not to figure out who the best player in the draft is. Their job is to figure out who the best players for them are, right? And so their boards are often 100, 120, 130, 150. I know the New England Patriots typically have one of the smallest boards in the league. Sometimes it's only 75, which is how you get them drafting like Cole Strange or whoever they drafted last year, right? It's like, well, we ran out of 1st and 2nd round guys, so I don't know what we're going to do with this pick.
Yeah, maybe not that strict, but yeah.
yeah, right. But it's kind of like an interesting, like, teams don't even operate this way. And so for us to be as confident as we can that this 4th rounder is going to be a start, and teams will tell you kind of the opposite sometimes. We like this 5th round guy we graded him as a 2nd rounder, and it's like, what? You had a 2nd round pick, man. Why didn't you get him then? Yeah. But it's always kind of like interesting to see kind of all of these things interact together. One thing that I find kind of curious though is like how we use different sources of data, because a lot of people are like, well, I only use the combine for confirmation, which to me means nothing, right? It's very similar to when a coach says, I look for the analytics to tell me what I know, and it's like, why even have that then? And to me, the combine, it's always good to have an idea of what you think a player will do going in, so you can set your baseline, so you can understand where your expectations are going in, and if they match those expectations, fantastic. But when a player exceeds those expectations, undersells those expectations, or in the case of one of the players I want to discuss, seems to test opposite their playing style, I think that that's also really valuable data. And a lot of people will say, well, okay, I thought this guy was going to run a 4.3. He ran a 4.48. That to me means I have to go look back at the tape. But what if the tape continues to tell you that he runs a 4.3? Then how do you resolve this? And no one has answered this question for me. How about you? You answered this question for me. What happens then?
Oh, great. So you're giving me the question nobody's been able to answer, and I'm retired and watched.
No, they just don't answer. They certainly are capable of doing it, but they just won't.
I just think you're probably wrong based on what you saw on tape. No, I mean, that could be a possibility. Each situation is probably unique. I mean, you're looking at how they're used and, okay, what, is he being slowed? If he's slower on tape, is he being slowed up by something? Schematically, is he not running at full speed for a reason? Is he throttling down in this space when you didn't notice it before? Like, there could be different things you're looking for, obviously, when you go back to the tape. But you're right. If you go back to tape and you keep seeing that, and at some point you've got to move on to like other data, like, and figure other things out, like, okay, what's his age? What's his production been like to this point? All of that kind of stuff. And you start to form like a more robust profile. But, Jalen Hyatt's one where it kind of is described like the way you're describing, where like people were pretty sure he was going to run like very like high 4.3.
A contender to potentially be the fastest guy at this year's combine.
Right. And he ran, was it 4.41 or 4.42 or something?
Well, let's take a quick look. I've got.
I think it was 4.41 or 4.42. But anyway, while you look that up, like that's
4.40 official.
4.40 official. Okay.
4.41 and 4.42 unofficial.
Unofficial. Okay. So
4.40. But people were expecting like, hey, he could push potentially 4.2. I project him to be a 4.32 guy, and it's like, well, 4.40 isn't slow by any means, but I mean he's 176 pounds, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and so people are going to probably go back to tape and see he is as fast as I thought he was. And especially in his case, because it's the only thing he does well. So like, he better be, if he's not like that, he just might be Devin Smith or something like that in the league. And so
oh man, I was so wrong with that dude.
Yeah. Me too. I liked him too. And I think with Hyatt, I haven't finished his evaluation or anything. In general, I'm pretty wary of one trick pony wide receivers. And so I know that his profile is one that I tend to stay away from a little bit.
Sure.
And we'll see what his tape looks like when I get to really sit down and study him closely. But I think that's the kind of thing where you're going back, you're looking, you're saying, okay, is his speed actually special? Like, am I seeing him, run through a zone gap and a safety or corner be late to turn and run with him? Am I seeing him actually like dust a guy off the line of scrimmage that I know is fast and just get over the top on him and run away from him? Is that what I'm seeing on tape? Because speed can be pretty deceiving at the wide receiver position. You can have huge gaps of separation, but those separation can come due to mental lapses or technical lapses from the secondary, which makes the receiver in that situation looks faster because everyone else is moving slower due to another deficiency. And so you have to just kind of run yourself through those checks, maybe watch a little bit closer and more careful. But ultimately, if your eyes are going to deceive you, if the player is like, there's a massive discrepancy, there's always got to be some explanation. If you can't find it, then I mean, your eye test may be the thing that's deceiving you more so than the numbers that you get from the combine.
Yeah, and I think that it is smart to at least default towards the likelihood that your subjective evaluation is wrong. And there's a dozen reasons why your 40-yard dash might not accurately represent it and your initial impression is accurate. There's all kinds of reasons that could be the case, right? It could be, that they were coached poorly to run the 40, or they were coached really well to run the 40, and they were not coached the same way in college. It could be because, wearing pads affects different players differently. It could be, the offense that they're expected to run, the defenses they see. I know that, for example, Tennessee spreads people out and that creates a lot of space that's going to make you look potentially a little bit faster. One cognitive bias that I really think is important for people to understand, and I was reminded of this while watching some people tweet out, videos from the NFL about players that are, running pretty fast, 4.45 or whatever. I remember, and I wish I remember the prospect. But somebody ran like a 4.45, and I think it was Keely Ringo. Maybe it wasn't a 4.45, but I know that he had a disappointing combine because he's supposed to be all about speed as well.
I think he ran in the 4.3s, but everything else was pretty disappointing.
Okay, yeah. Oh, his second 40 was a 4.45. That's what. But his official's a 4.36 because his first, they take the better of the two, which I think is the right approach.
Yeah, it makes sense. 4.3 is good time. It makes sense because you don't have to actually change direction when you run a 40, which is his problem. So
brutal. And like a coward, he didn't do agilities. So
yeah, right. We all know already. What is everything we needed to know.
Yeah. But when that sort of thing happens, people are like, man, he looks faster, and it's like, well, that should give you some pause then, right? Like you see this, and again, it's not perfect. The hand timing, because it's a half electronic, the 40 finish is electronic, the 40 start is hand timed. So it's not perfect, right? And you can, do your frame by frame dissection or whatever you want, but that should at least give you pause and be like, well, okay, if he looks fast, what does that tell me about me? Knowing that I've gotten a number in front of me telling me he's like average or whatever. And I think that is important, but also one of the things that really kind of stands out is that people perceive people with high foot frequency as runners to be faster, even if they have the same speed as somebody with a long stride. That's why Randy Moss always looked friggin' slow, right? When he was like blazing by guys that ran 4.3s, right? He's just created space against them. And he looks slow, and people have accused him of being lazy, which is, kind of true, kind of not true. But I think accelerated by the fact that he looks slow all the time. And I think foot frequency is one of the biases that we have when we're trying to evaluate a player's speed. They just seem fast. And I think that the combine is a really great way for us to recontextualize player speeds on a fairly even playing field. Let's talk about some individual players in position drills that we want to take a look at. And one of the ones that I wanted to talk about is not going to be a huge priority, I think. It could be, but I think for the Vikings, but one that I think raises some of these questions in interesting ways is Lucas Van Ness, who tested extremely well, except he's kind of, in my understanding, I haven't watched a ton of these guys. My understanding is that he's a power rusher, and he did not do well in the explosion drills. He actually did very poorly in the explosion drills, and he did outstanding in the agility drills. And that's not the kind of rusher that he seems to be. So how do you kind of, this reminds me of that Kansas State Jordan Willis a while back, where he had just an insane combine. It was like, I don't really get it. How do you kind of deal with this kind of scenario where a guy tests really well, but not in the drills you expected?
Yeah, it's happened before. You're right about Willis. That's definitely one of the situations that's happened before. I'm sure if I sat and thought in it, I could recall others as well. Totally the opposite of what you'd expect. Van Ness, I thought, I don't like many things about his tape, but the one thing that I thought I could count on was the fact that he did seem to have good lower body explosiveness getting off the ball, which, hey, if you're going to play on the line, that's probably a good first trait to have. Like, it's probably one of the most important things. Everything after that, well, not everything, but I had some questions about the ceiling after that. Namely because he just never tries to do anything else. So other than bull rush. So
right.
The fact that he could go to the combine and show that he has pretty good agilities, or excellent agilities for his weight and size, is basically all that I take from that is that, okay, there is a ceiling here for him to potentially be more as a rusher if he is so inclined. I don't know if he will ever have the natural instincts to be able to transition a rush. Like there's something very comfortable about bull rushing as a defensive lineman. It's just very square. It's very physical. If you have that mentality anyway, you try to overpower somebody. It makes sense. It's almost the starting point for most pass rushers because it's just a very basic, simple thing. And when you win that way, it looks good. It feels good, all of that stuff. But there's also like this idea of building on that you have to do as a pass rusher if you're going to be successful once you get to the NFL. In college, you don't necessarily have to, although maybe if Lucas Van Ness had, he would have started at least one and game at Iowa. That would have been nice. But in the NFL, you have to build on it. And so, nobody wins with just power in the NFL as an edge rusher. Like it's even the strongest guys, Reggie White would have been the last guy just won with pure power I mean, he had other moves as well, but like there's just in today's NFL, there's just too many guys that can match your power. You may win a certain matchup with it, but on a week to week, every week in the NFL basis, you're going to have more than that in your bag because there's guys that can match strength and athleticism. So you need more in your bag. He doesn't have more in his bag, but the fact that he tested well in the agility suggests to me, okay, maybe he could actually bend the edge if he ever had to, or if he ever was so inclined to do so, or learned how to transition in his rush from bull to rip, or, rip and dip or things like that. Like if he ever learns that sequence of moves or attempts a combination of moves, there may actually be the ability to accomplish those moves at a level worthy of the NFL. And that's important because you never saw it on tape. And if he hadn't tested that way, I didn't necessarily have an assumption that he was going to be bad in those tests. I just, like I did with Jordan Willis, for example, I just thought that I didn't know because he never showed on tape. So I was just very open-minded about what those could be. The fact that they were good bodes well for him. The fact that his explosiveness, the jumps were not very good is really puzzling to me. And I never thought his explosiveness was elite, but I thought it was going to be better than that. And so overall, I thought he did well at the combine, but I don't know that I would say I was moved enough by his performance to say, oh, I'm going to move off my projection as a late third round grade.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about him as a potential first rounder. And I know that this has happened before. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head if there has been a player without any starts that was a first rounder. And I feel like that has happened. But I can't recall right now. But there's been a lot of discussion about him as a first rounder when it comes to kind of projection, right? With a lot of these players that don't have a lot of moves, that don't seem like they've got a lot of feel, they can still go in the first round as like really great athletes. I think Bud Dupree is a good example of one. I think Marcus Davenport is a really good example of one. This position in particular seems pretty rife for it because of how athleticism seems to matter more at this position than maybe any other position in the NFL. And so drafting an athlete here seems to make a lot of sense. I know Bjorn Werner, for example, is another edge rusher / 5-tech that made it here in the first round based off of basically just his pure athleticism. Do you take into account because to me, when you're talking about like, hey, does he have the instincts? Can he be taught this? Is it something that we can work with and coach up? To me, this screams, I got to know how old this guy is, because if he is 23 and he hasn't figured it out, what chance do I have? Right. And maybe he's only been in football for 2-3 years. And so then you've got like Bjorn Werner, then you've got like a reasoning behind it. But if he has been in football since he was a freshman in high school, he's 23 now. Iowa's not bad at coaching edge rushers, right? I can't, it doesn't seem to me that I feel like that becomes a more important fact. Like age always seems important to me, but this feels like in this situation where you're banking on upside more than the ability to be productive right away, age is probably like a very prior consideration.
I would say so. And it's one of the reasons I'd say, not one of the main reasons, I'm also not as enamored with Tyree Wilson as many other people are. And I think, he'll turn 23 years old here in May. And so he's an older prospect. It's not like troublingly old, but I would say just the fact that he's so raw on his tape, like he just tries to power rush everybody. And if he gets matched up with a tight end, it looks good. And so when that happens in the NFL, I think he'll probably keep looking good, but that's not going to happen as often in the NFL. And so the fact that there's not elite production there with Tyree Wilson, I think he had 7 sacks each of the last 2 seasons, 50.5 sacks in college. So he passes the disqualifier thresholds that I found helpful to evaluate edge rushers by. But I don't think there's an overwhelming level of production here. And the fact that, you think about, okay, competition played. I watch some of these schools that he's playing at Texas Tech, and I'm like, man, these tackles don't even know how to pass that, and he's not beating these guys. And then you also see the fact that, okay, he's going to be 23 years old in May. He feels like he's got a long way to go to reach his ceiling in the NFL. Everybody's kind of talked, he's big, long, powerful, explosive. I think he could be explosive if he stopped false stepping out of his stance. But I think that there's something there, but he's already older. He's had plenty of experience, plenty of time. He's been at Texas A&M and Texas Tech, and he's a 5th-year senior, and he took him a while to get going. And I just think that there's some troubling things with that profile that would have me concerned. It wouldn't take him off my board, I don't think, but it would have me a little bit concerned with a guy who, to me, still has a ways to go before he's ready to reach what most people would say is his peak in the NFL.
And before we move on, are you concerned with Nolan Smith's weight? Because the workouts are fantastic, but we have to keep in mind 238 pounds. You referenced earlier that, the reason that we're impressed with Lucas Van Ness's agilities is because we're adjusting for the fact that he did them at 272 pounds, which is a really important element because things become more predictive. These workouts become more helpful when you account for weight and height and length and how difficult it is to do that, how much force you can bring to bear, et cetera, and so on. Nolan Smith had a phenomenal combine if you just take a look at what the workout numbers are. And it's still extremely impressive once you account. Like, there's not a bunch of 240-pound guys running a 4.39. That is insane, right? But when it comes to projecting his eventual position, you just say, hey, Hassan Reddick did it. Randy Gregory is good when he can see the field. I'm banking on it. Or are you just like, look, there are better edge rushers in this class. I am not going to necessarily be so excited to bank on this guy's athleticism when, he can't even crack 240 pounds.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say I'm not concerned about it at all, but he is my edge too in this class after Anderson, and so I'm a fan of Nolan Smith for sure. I understand why people are concerned with that part. The plus I would say for him is that on tape, there's no reason, there's no cause for concern with his size. And he played in the SEC, and he played a lot of guys who will start on Sundays at tackle in the NFL, and offensive line in general in the NFL. And he physically held up extremely well in the SEC. In fact,
he's a good run defender too. He's not just a pass rusher.
Is he the best? I mean, he's probably the best run defender out of the top edge rushers in the class. He's
certainly better than Will Anderson.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you can do with that what you want, but point of attack, slipping blocks, getting off blocks, setting the edge, getting out off blocks and getting out on the perimeter. He does it all, everything that you want from the position in terms of run defense. So it's all there on tape, and I don't see him get bodied ever as a run defender. I think it affects him more as a pass rusher because the explosiveness you talked about, there isn't a big punch behind it. And he could be a great power rusher if he were bigger, stronger guy, I think, because there is that burst of the ball, and you definitely have a physical mindset in a player. He has the ability to kind of rip and bend the edge and hit some moves. He's got a cross chop. If he had a power rush element to his game, I would say he's probably in there with Will Anderson as the top 5 type of pick. But because he doesn't have that in his game, there's no punch behind his power rushes. I think that's an important element to being a good rusher in the NFL. I don't think it's necessarily the primary path I want to see edges win on, but I want to see them be able to threaten that way at least. And I don't know that he has it. So he's going to have to win like a Hassan Reddick does, like a Josh Uche does in the NFL. The good news is that he has to win like those guys as pass rushers. He's probably already a better run defender than those guys are. Reddick has come a ways in his career, but the guys he's going to be compared to as pass rushers, the floor is already higher with Smith because he will be able to be on the field in those other ways that they were question marks for them in their career early on. So a lot of things you want to bet on. People will rip on his production. His production per snap is actually outstanding. He had the pec injury, obviously, and Georgia's situation is just unique, man. It's the deepest defensive line. They got freaks everywhere. It's just you're always going to play in rotation. They blew everybody out, so he's barely playing second half, hardly any games this past season, and so it's just there's so little snaps to go off of based off of that stuff, and then the pec injury. But he really looked like he was on his way this year. He looked like he was going to put together a special year before the pec injury because he actually would have been able to play full games over some of their tougher games in the second half of the year when they weren't blowing everybody out. But he never got that chance because of the injury, which is a shame. But he just turned 22. So again, the age isn't a huge issue and he's already more developed. But I mean, yeah, there's not a lot of 235-pound edges playing in the NFL. And so, yeah, it's a concern to me, I think, just because he'll have to be an outlier, and outliers always bring me some level of concern, even if I think there's more reason to have hope about his than similar players in the past.
Sure. When it comes to, and you're a Steelers fan, you're already biased towards undersized edge rushers, but am I wrong?
No, probably not.
Yeah, but it actually, let's bring up the Steelers again, because I want to talk about when it makes sense to take a player that you like fairly high and then ask them to completely change their body. That happened, of course, with Le'Veon Bell, who lost, I don't know, like 35, 40 pounds with the Steelers and became, for a brief period of time, I don't know if the best is the right word, but maybe the most valuable back in the NFL. Because he was so shifty, he was a great pass catcher. He still retained a level of power. You asked him to be a completely different guy than he was at Michigan State. Do you ask somebody like a Nolan Smith, who's a really well-developed player, really explosive, a super athlete, and ask him to gain, 30 pounds just so he fits your scheme? Or what do you do there?
I mean, I would just see if he could, like, I'd be interested in seeing if he could put on more weight probably. But it may be something that I'm willing to let play out during his rookie year and then evaluate after that point. 235 is light. Could he, his pec's been injured. And so that, I'm sure that's been John Owning kind of speculated about that. I say, yeah, that makes sense. Like maybe he could be a guy that gets to 245 if he is able to, be on his normal weight gaining regimen rather than, I'm assuming, rehabbing a torn pec. So that could be a part of it. That maybe he could put on that weight pretty easily, and maybe he actually played heavier. I don't know that anybody asked him at the combine, about his playing weight and stuff like that. But obviously, that would be one of the things I'm most curious about. But I think there's the tricky thing about Nolan Smith is that if you look at him, you don't think like this guy is so undersized. Like he's yoked. Like he's probably one of the best bodies in the class. Like he just has broad shoulders and his arms are big, like, maybe his legs, he could bulk a little bit, but I mean, he doesn't look like a guy who's lacking in terms of size that much. Like he's well built. He could tell he puts his time in the weight room. It's not like a Andre Carter situation where that guy is just so lanky and it's like, what are we going to do with this guy? Like he's so thin, his legs and like his frame. And it's just like, this isn't even playable in the NFL, like a frame like this. And that's not the case with Smith. Like he looks like his frame is like very well built and ready to go. So if that only still equals 235 pounds, then maybe you aren't going to have much, reason trajectory for growth or for improvement there. But I would be interested in seeing experimenting some with it if I were an NFL team, but I wouldn't be like, get to 255, 260, and then we'll talk. Like that would be crazy to me. I would be more like, can you get to 245 on like a normal workout regimen, like one of our normal routines? Like if you can get to 245 and hold 245 and then you play well like that as a rookie, then that's fine. That's what we want you at. If you get bodied and tossed around the field and we're like, I don't know if we can play this guy, then, as a rookie at 245 or 240, 235, whatever, then I'm like, okay, we have issues. We're going to have to like come up with a separate plan for you and try to like pack on some LBs.
All right. So we talked a lot about a position the Vikings are probably not that interested in, but I think it helped us explore kind of a lot of the questions that surround the combine generally. So yeah. I'm gonna pretend that it was useful there. Cornerback. So you haven't watched any of these guys, right?
Quarterbacks.
No, cornerback.
Oh,
the position the Vikings are absolutely going to draft.
Oh, cornerbacks. I thought they were finally going to move on from Kirk, but if they're not going to do that, then I guess we'll go corners. No, I've seen like a little bit of some of these guys in different capacities. Watched Joey Porter live a good bit, but I haven't studied corners.
Okay, so there are like 7 different corners that at different times will be projected to go in the first round. That's probably not going to happen, but it is a really phenomenal class in that regard. And, that allows people to be very aggressive about, kicking players out of their first round grades, and still having options available to them. So Emmanuel Forbes, great at pick sixes, really great at, finding the ball, tracking the ball, really good speed. Also 166 pounds. Bye. Devin Witherspoon.
Is that a buy? Like, is that
for a first round grade?
Does that make you yeah, I guess
166 pounds?
Yeah. I just mean like, are you just basing it off what you think? Because in my head, yeah, I'm like, oh, huge red flag. But I actually wondered then aloud to myself as I saw that, I was like, okay, 166. Like, is there information that would like disqualify him it that way? I don't know if you could even find a sample size large enough, but I wonder.
Just the sample size is Cameron Dantzler, and it's not looking good.
Was Dantzler that light? Was he 166?
He bulked up to 180, had an all-time awful combine, and then slimmed down to an unknown weight at his, because it was the COVID year, right? So no one showed up to his pro day. The agent just filmed it. The agent did not tell us what weight he was, right? Like, why would he do that? And so he runs a 4.38 at an unknown weight, but we know that his playing weight was below 175. And so
he was a bottom tier athlete for his position, and Forbes is an elite athlete. And
right, yeah, and there are differences there, right?
Yeah, I haven't watched a second of Forbes, by the way. I'm not even really playing devil's advocate. I'm just really curious.
Well, no, this is an important question because the Vikings are probably going to draft a quarterback in the first round, and we could at least discuss this question without having watched the player, because when do we start kicking players out for? I mean, if he's 110 pounds, obviously we can't roster Solak out there, right? We have to throw him out. But like 166 now he's just a taller me, right? I think I'm 166. Let's say I am. Now he's just a taller me that is also faster and good at catching the ball, whatever. But like that, like he'll get pushed around a little bit if you're going to ask him to defend the run. If your scheme has cornerbacks, kind of set the edge as somebody else blitzes and, all that stuff, right? If you're running like a classic Bud Carson cover 2, he's going to be there to defend the run. And he's 166 pounds, right? If you're going up against A.J. Brown, like, good luck. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, do you want to hear? Here's every corner that's weighed in at 175 or less at the combine.
Yeah,
ready for this?
Yeah.
Last 24 years of data. Marvin Love, well-known Kentucky corner.
Yeah, everyone knows
he's 164. Forbes is second, 166. So, not great. Cedric Williams, Kansas State corner. Kevin Brooks, South Carolina corner. Nickel Roby Coleman.
Hey, there's a guy.
Yeah, and he was also 5'7", right? 5'8".
Yeah, it's a little bit different with him. He's got a lower center of gravity.
He was actually pretty bulky.
Yeah, 5'7". Yeah, I'd say so.
Hamp Cheevers was another fit in your pocket.
Oh, I remember that guy just because of the name.
Yeah.
I remember Hamp Cheevers.
Not an elite player. Bruce Johnson, Miami. Wilry Fontenot from Arizona. Rashard Robinson, LSU. You did that a couple
that's a guy.
Yeah. Jack Jones from Arizona State. He's good now, right? For the
Patriots? He's good.
Yeah, so far so good. Scott Starks from Wisconsin, 172. Jeremetrius Butler. I remember him vaguely. Kansas State, 2001, 173. Kel Wright from Oregon. Ryan Smith from Florida in 2007. Brian Mills from North Carolina Central in 2021. Marcus Jones, Houston corner. Reggie Austin.
So different Marcus Jones than the one that got like the rookie, every rookie player of the year except offense, defense, and special teams. Marcus Jones this year.
This was 2022. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's that guy.
Yeah.
Okay. 6th-round pick.
Yeah.
Super special teamer.
Right.
Pretty interesting corner. Ran a couple of offensive plays to the house. So I'm not going to count him as a hit because he's interesting.
He's the Patriots guy, right?
Yeah. He's interesting for reasons that don't really have much to do with playing corneraback, but let's.
Basically, the only two even interesting players
Patriots.
on this list played for the Patriots
this year.
Yeah. So,
all right. So Emmanuel Forbes
in the right direction for Forbes, but it's not.
Hey, the Patriots have like 3 corners hitting free agency, so yeah, he's a Patriot. Got it.
Yeah.
My research has suggested that the more you weigh at corner while still maintaining functional athleticism, the better. And so to me, 166 is a concern, at least for a first-round pick. I know that the Vikings have told people that they had a first-round pick on Cameron Dantzler and then waited because of the weight/combine concerns until the 3rd round, which I don't know what that says about them and their evaluation because he didn't turn out to be good, but they did only spend a 3rd-round pick, right?
But he shut down Jamar Chase that one time.
Yeah, he did. He did in the SEC and not in the NFL.
That's the truth. That's the truth.
Yeah. But, we've got a Joey Porter. We've got a Keely Ringo. We've got Christian Gonzalez, Devin Witherspoon, Cam Smith, Deonte Banks. Deonte Banks had a phenomenal combine. I would argue probably the best out of this whole group. Joey Porter had a great combine. Christian Gonzalez had a pretty good one. Again, a lot of these people didn't run agility, so it's really difficult to get a good sense. But if you wanted to knock Devin Witherspoon out for whatever reason, I know a lot of people are down on him, Emmanuel Forbes for whatever reason, Keely Ringo for whatever reason, you're still left with the first-round class that has Deonte Banks, Joey Porter, Christian Gonzalez, and Cam Smith. That's a pretty good cornerback group, right? And I didn't even include Clark Phillips III because he's a nickel.
Yeah, I mean, the depth in the class, the versatility of the class, some of the top guys being able to play in multiple coverage schemes, I think all those things are huge pluses for the class. And then you're just seeing more and more like size speed freaks where it used to just be speed at corner. Now it's size speed. And we've seen this trend this way for for years, and this class just totally embodies it. I mean, what Joey Porter, what was arm length? 34 something? Like,
yeah, just absolutely like why like it make. I mean, his father was an edge rusher, right? So you know, like why? I guess.
By the way, he had the best quote of the combine that went like totally under the radar, I thought, when he was like, "I'm like my dad on the field and my mom in every other way," which is probably pretty good.
Which is probably a good thing. Yeah, I remember that was great.
I was like, this kid gets it.
Yeah. All right, so we learned nothing of value from that.
Yeah, nothing. It's a good corner class. The Vikings are set up, man. Like they can absolutely address the position heavily. And honestly, because I don't think the class is good at many other spots, you're going to see in the top of the draft, like you always do. I think you're going to see. I bet you'll see 4 quarterbacks go in the top 10. I bet you'll see an offensive tackle get in there like you always do. 2 edge rushers, Carter probably. We'll see what happens. And then what I just say, not 8 or 9. Like you're gonna have the corners falling to the teens. I guarantee. I mean, you're gonna have the corners falling to the teens. Like I just feel like, and then you're gonna have somewhere between 11, not even a picks 11 and 32. You're gonna have 6-7 corners come off the board. I genuinely believe there'll be that many in the first round because of the testing. As long as there's not character stuff, the testing, the size, the positional importance, the fact that the class doesn't have many other players of positions that are typically like wide receiver picked in those ranges very heavily. I think there's just going to be a lot of those guys are going to go off the board in that range of the draft.
Yeah, I mean, it sucks because this is a pretty good running back class, but like, who cares?
Right. Nobody cares about them. Yeah.
One element that does stand out, though, is that this is a tight end class where I think if these tight ends were distributed across a bunch of other classes, 3 or 4 of them would be able to go in the first round. But that just doesn't happen. And so you're going to end up with some really potentially high-quality tight ends in the second, even third rounds that in other classes might be considered as fringe first-rounders. They all tested out of this world. Tucker Kraft had a good one. Sam Laporta had a really good one. Michael Mayer, I think, did what he needed to do. He's kind of the consensus top tight end. But Zach Kuntz from Old Dominion, old former Penn State guy, had probably the best testing out of any tight end in this class. Luke Schoonmaker from Michigan. I don't even know if I got his name right, but we'll say I did. Cool. I mean, he tested really well. And then that doesn't include all the really interesting tight ends that didn't test well enough for me to notice, or tested well and I forgot, or tested poorly but will turn out fine, right? Like this is pretty interesting. Like, what do you think about teams that might have like a settled tight end position, right? Like if you're the Eagles or the Vikings, you're pretty happy with your tight end production. If you're the Chiefs, you want to kind of look to the future maybe. But if you're the 49ers, you're pretty set at tight end, it seems. What do you think about like the potential to grab what is generally considered to be a less valuable prospect and double up at a less valuable position?
I think it depends a lot what you want to do offensively. Like how I just think of Tampa Bay situation right now, just listening to Canales' pressers as he comes in as the OC and just talking about how they're going to be multiple in their personnel groupings, but they're going to not have that many plays, but everything's going to look different. And so they need personnel to be able to do that. And they had that in Seattle. They had multiple tight ends who could play, and the Bucs don't really have that right now. Cade Otton, showed some things I thought last year, and I think he'll definitely be at least a number 2 tight end in the league. But taking a tight end that projects to be better than Cade could make sense for them. So it really depends what you want to do. How often are you going to use do you just need a blocker? When you go to 12 personnel, are you just looking for a blocker to come onto the field, or are you looking to throw the ball at a 12 personnel, go play action a good bit, get under center? And you need that guy to be a little bit more dynamic in the passing game than some number 2 tight ends around the NFL. So it really depends on the approach schematically and how you want to play things in that regard. And if you do want to do that, there's a number of guys that could be complementary pieces, could fulfill certain roles. These guys are very different in this tight end class, I think. There's complete guys. There's guys who are probably going to be better as blockers than receivers. And then there's guys who couldn't block if their life depended on it and probably can only do 1 or 2 things as a receiver, but those things could be really valuable too. So just a very versatile, diverse group of tight ends in this class as well.
All right. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I wish I could spend more time on them because there's some pretty interesting ones. I know that You tweeted out I think it was you that tweeted out a video of Sam Laporta, and you were like, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely would say my tight end rankings, my top 6 are kind of done right now. And we'll see if anybody breaks into that, but it's the consensus 6 that I've watched like the most so far. But I would say that I don't necessarily see it as like the way that consensus sees it in terms of the tight ends, but there's a lot of good players for sure among those 6.
Cool. Running back, any go in the first round? You think Bijan breaks there? I mean, he had a really good combine.
Yeah.
Not like outstanding, but definitely well above average for the position, and that's kind of all he needed. Do you think he goes?
He'll get in there. He'll get in there. I mean, yeah, but part of it is just the interviews, right? Like he's going to win there. Like, look, he's phenomenal. Like, I just listened to him interview once. It's like, yeah, I hate running backs and I'd probably draft him. Like,
when it comes to some of these other guys, I mean, we had an outstanding one from the Tulsa guy, I think Deneric Prince. We had a really good one from Zach Charbonnet, former Michigan, former UCLA. Tank Bixby had a good one. Jahmyr Gibbs ran really well. When you take a look at a running back group that's probably pretty good, do you kind of move off your valuation just a little bit and say, all right, well, I mean, obviously it depends on the team and what the running back situation is. All right, well, I wouldn't draft one in the first round, and I typically wouldn't draft one in the second round, but I've got to pick at the bottom of the second here. This is a great class. This is probably the top of a really good class. I should probably just pick one here and then, take a dip at corner later or something like that. Like, how do you approach that when you know the class is like pretty good?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't rule it out in those ranges of the draft for sure. But like you said, it is what's come off the board so far. What do I have in my roster? Like, do I, just really need a back? Because I think like the last couple of years watching Tampa Bay has actually like swayed me a little bit because their running backs have been so freaking bad. Like, it's unbelievable how bad they are. Whereas I really, for a time, I thought you could put anybody out there. You could put anybody off the street out there that's played running back at the college level, and they could run, like they could carry your run game. And there was a while where that was kind of true. Like, there were guys that were going in, like rushing for 1,000 yards out of the league. Like, remember Philip Lindsay's rage? Like, and then he was like gone. Like, I don't even know where he is. He's like on his third team or something since then. Like, but it's just, we had that happen for so long. And I was just like, it really doesn't even matter. Like, just like wherever you draft one. Dave Bucks actually like kind of like challenged that, just like, yo, yeah, you think that? Like, let's put like some of the worst backs you ever seen in your life running the football like out there, and like let's see how bad this thing can be. And their run game has been totally miserable. And people are like, wow, they can't run the ball. Look, they diversified the approach schematically. Like, there's some things they can definitely do better, and I've written talked about those late. But like, they have a pretty good offensive line, even when they were hurt this year. Like, even last year they were like efficient when they ran the ball more, but they still just like, it just was never that good. And big reason why the backs just couldn't create anything. Like, they couldn't get to creases in time. They couldn't break tackles. The vision was bad. Like, the pad level was bad. Like, there was just so much that was bad. I was like, okay, there actually might be a bar here, and these guys are under it for sure. And I'm not sure it has to be first round caliber back that can, that you need to draft. I know that it isn't that, but at some point in the draft, depending on what your other needs are, like, yeah, you can talk me into a back a little bit easier than you have in the past, I think.
All right. I mean, I think that like leads to some fascinating discussions, especially if the Vikings do feel they need to do something about Dalvin Cook. Mm. Wide receivers, you didn't watch them, right? So you don't know anything about them.
I've seen some of them. I've seen some of them, but what do they? The Vikings don't. They have like, I mean, a superhero as their third wide receiver right now, and I don't know what they should be concerned with this class.
I mean, how many is a superhero going to get you 700 yards, man? I don't know.
I mean, that's actually a good question. I'm not sure.
But like there's a good chance that they move on from Adam Thielen, right? His cap hit is $19.9 million, and he didn't get the production that you kind of hope from him last year, and I think that's probably it. There's been a lot of
Do you
waves.
think he could retire?
No, I think he wants to keep playing.
Okay.
There's been a lot of waves.
Doing TV this week, and I was like,
wonder
if
he could probably do well on TV. I don't know that that's something he likes to do, but he's pretty good at it. So, we'll see, I guess. But if the Vikings move on from Adam Thielen, or if they have that in their plan, I know that they were actually interested last year at some point early in the draft for a receiver. Obviously didn't work out that way, but it's in their brain, right? And so looking at this receiver class, just kind of broadly, you take a look at the first, second round guys. Maybe they won't give up on a corner that they really like because there's only 3 on the roster right now and they're not good. Is there somebody in that kind of range that maybe like a Josh Downs, if he falls a little bit into the middle of the second or something like that? I mean, because it seems like there's a lot of receivers that could kind of clump up there after you get through the run of the corners, because there's probably going to be a couple that go for, obviously Quentin Johnston is projected to go kind of middle of the first round, early in the first round. There's other receivers as they kind of go through, but it seems like there's going to be kind of like a waterfall at the bottom of the first, top of the second, and that could lead to some interesting players in the middle of the second. Do you think that there's anything there from what you've been able to watch and maybe just taking a look at some of the combine testing that kind of intrigues you as somebody who could complement Jefferson?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think there's not a lot of different body types, but there's still a lot of different skill sets in this class. Most of the wide receivers are pint sized in this class. So
it's frustrating.
Yeah. If you are going to say I'm drafting one anyway, like, and you want a wide receiver anyway, you pretty much are only picking, if you're not picking Quentin Johnston, you're pretty much picking from those types of players more or less. And so I think it's about just finding like, what do you want? Like what kind of a threat do you want on the field? And, and that's what I think Minnesota may have to figure out. The fact Jefferson can do everything, you always hear the build your wide receiver core like a basketball team, and Jefferson can kind of play every position on basketball. You know what I mean? Like
right.
He can play above the rim. He can stretch the field. He can, run after the catch. Like he can do all of it. So you're not necessarily looking to compliment him maybe as much, but I would definitely like to continue to provide vertical elements in the passing game, I think. And guys that can get you kind of easy yards as an offense, I think would be a fun aspect of this. They haven't really, Jefferson can do that stuff, but Thielen isn't really that player and it hasn't been. And so I think having a guy like Zay Flowers could be like a nice piece for this team, somebody who can create and make some things happen with the ball in their hands. He's not the only guy in this class like this, but I think he's probably the best guy maybe in the class like this. And so that could be an interesting fit for them as well, I think. But all the receivers being small, that really, like from a philosophical standpoint, gives me a lot of curiosity about the class, because what about these teams that have like size requirements? And like, I'm not familiar enough with the Vikings regime is new enough that I'm not familiar enough whether they would adhere to any strict like requirements there. But teams like that, are they going to like come off of their, like I'm thinking Jason Light, like he's not drafted any of these dudes, like based on his, like in the first 3 rounds anyway, what he values at the wide receiver position and past drafts and things like that. Like he's looking for size and speed and jumps. Like he wants all 3 of those things. And I'm just not sure you're getting size in this class with most of these guys. And so it'll be very interesting to see which teams, perhaps the Vikings included, will be willing to relax some of those parameters, because they need wide receivers so bad. And it's such a bad free agent class for wide receivers. There's not a lot of other ways to hit the position. And so I'm going to be very curious to see, like, if we look back at this class and be like, that was the outlier for a lot of these teams. They're not touching another wide receiver like that, but there were just only tiny guys in this class, so they had to take them.
Yeah, fair enough. We got to talk about these quarterbacks. I mean, like, you have to, right?
Yeah.
All right. So Anthony Richardson has like the world's best combine ever for a quarterback. And this is interesting because I haven't watched a ton of these guys, but you pick up some things, you watch some highlights, you watch a game or two, and you can get kind of a vague sense of how you feel about these guys. And to me, I actually kind of match the consensus a lot. So for me, it's Bryce Young, CJ Stroud. Those I can switch pretty easily based off of someone making a compelling argument, basically. Anthony Richardson's quarterback 3, Will Levis is quarterback 4 for me. And I think that there's a huge kind of gap before you get to like Hendon Hooker or whatever, right? And I guess Tanner McKee is after that. Like, I suppose. Maybe.
Who cares?
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah. But when you get to these conversations, people are really polarized about the conversations. Like, oh my God, Anthony Richardson was a great athlete. Does it matter? And that's a really silly question to me, right? Like, does it? Of course it matters. The question is, how much does it matter? Do you move somebody around on your board because of it? How do you approach, your development of this player if you end up drafting them, that kind of thing? Bryce Young comes in at 5'10", We kind of knew that going in. One big question was going to be his weight. The rumored playing weight for him was like 180. I think he was like listed near 185 or something like that. But he comes in at 204, 207, something like that, pretty close to Kyler. And I don't know if that counts because he didn't work out. I don't know if that's a functional playing weight for him, but to a lot of people that did resolve some concerns that he was able to get up there. CJ Stroud, a guy that, can't answer basically any questions at the combine, because all of the things that the combine would ask him to do, he's very good at. We're all fairly aware of it. All of the concerns that we have about him have to do with on-field play and not really kind of play-to-play stuff. He's a very smart player, but like performance under pressure, that kind of thing, right? Consistency. Will Levis is hard to talk about. I mean, it's difficult. He comes from a pro-style system. He's a really good athlete, but he's not. Of the athletes in this class, it's kind of hard to stand out, but at least he does it at a prototypical size. So these conversations have become very thorny and difficult for people. And when you try to have some of these conversations, people kind of get out of their gourd. Because when I was talking about how Anthony Richardson had a really impressive combine, a bunch of people were like, well, you can't draft him first overall. And it's like, well, I didn't say that. What are you talking about?
Right.
And then people were saying, this stuff doesn't matter at all. Does it?
Yeah, it definitely matters. 100% it matters. Like, dude's a freak athlete. Why would that not matter? Like, that matters for everything you do in a sport. Like, athleticism always matters. The question, like you said, is how much does it matter compared to what the weaknesses are and the things you had bigger questions about? And I think it's certainly fair to say I had bigger questions about Anthony Richardson than what he was able to answer during no matter what he did at the combine. So it honestly, it didn't really matter what he did. Maybe even the throwing. To me, the throwing for Anthony Richardson was more important than the other stuff. Now, because I already knew he was an awesome athlete, like it was amazing to see that he's like one of the best athletes we've ever seen at the position. I think that is impressive and should be noted. But like, I think it's understandable to say, how he throws because of the large accuracy concerns that he has based on his college tape was going to be more important to me. But like you're throwing on air, I don't even know that any of it, mattered that much to me to know all that set of stuff. I thought it was, from a pure just entertainment perspective, I care way more about like the fact that he was running the 40 and jumping and all this stuff. Like that was sick to watch. Part of the combine for that is just enjoying the athletic performances. I don't think it means that he's gonna necessarily have NFL success because of those things, but they're definitely assets that help him. They can help him along that path. Especially early on in his career. I think while he's figuring some of these other things out, can you still be able to achieve some positive results for your team, despite the fact that your process as a passer is probably going to be negative at times, like it is for most rookies. And so knowing that there's that baseline, I think is definitely helpful with him. But I think in general, like Levis, you mentioned him being hard to talk about. I think people don't know quite what to do with Levis. And it's kind of funny. Like, I know people want to hate him, but they're also like scared because they did this with Justin Herbert and Josh Allen to a degree. And it's like, are we going to get burned again here? Because I'm not sure we want to do this again, go down this path. And I don't think he plays like Josh Allen at all. So I know that comp's been out there kind of, not really, but I don't think he plays like Josh Allen at all. So I completely ignore that comp. I do see a little bit of the Justin Herbert stuff with him in just the like arm strength, driving the ball and not being afraid of tight windows, throws, that kind of stuff. And at times I felt like not being good under pressure, not feeling the pressure as well in college, having the athleticism to get away from some of it when you did feel it, but not always look like. I think Herbert looks way more escapable now than he did in college. Like his pocket movement is jaw dropping to me now, but in college I didn't get that impression. And Levis, there's flashes, but I still think at times he could manage the pocket better. But I mean, I'd see some of those similarities, maybe, I guess, but like again, it's the quandary with all these quarterbacks. And I think Ollie Connolly on our pod last week said it best. Like, how could you feel that confident? Like, how could anybody feel that confident, especially about this position? I mean, there's just no question. Like, a couple of the best quarterbacks in the league were not very good at playing quarterback in college. Like Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, even at times. Like, I mean, obviously, like there were Herbert and Hurts achieved things that Allen didn't in college to a degree, but like they were still like they largely lacking. Like we came away feeling a little bit like they're gonna have to make some huge leaps in the NFL to be like what we hope to be, and they did it, and they're awesome and they're amazing. And it's like even Mahomes to a degree did that. Like it was like how did this translate to the NFL? Watching him play in college was insane. He just run back 15 yards and launch the ball in the air. And it was like, this process is nuts if it works in the NFL. And then he does it. And it's just such, I think it's hard for anybody to feel really confident in their quarterback evaluations because we're learning that so much of this is the intangibles, the system, the coaching, putting the traits in the best position to succeed. And when that didn't happen for guys in college, to the degree that it's happened for them in the NFL anyway, it like could transform everything when they got to the next level. And we just, from our vantage point as analysts, just can't know that much. And it's one of the reasons why I don't envy like Mark Schofield, who spends all this time on quarterbacks. I'll watch them all. Like I'm in the process of watching them right now. I'm going to talk about them, but I'm just going to say, like, I feel way less confident in that position than all the other positions that I'll scout. And I wish I didn't even have to scout them because I just think there's so much unknown to the position that we can't see from our vantage point as draft analysts. The teams will have access to some of it, but a lot of it's just a crapshoot. And when they get to the NFL,
right,
we'll figure out whether it works or not. But it's just a very difficult position to feel like any sense of real confidence in these days.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the example that you gave is the one I used when I was talking about both Richardson and Levis, which is you take a look at the championship games, right? 3 out of those 4 quarterbacks were not considered very polished coming out. I mean, Brock Purdy, let's not count him. But like you take a look at those other 3 quarterbacks, you take a look at the quarterbacks that everyone's really excited about, right? So Patrick Mahomes, obviously. Justin Hurts, obviously, right? Jalen Hurts, obviously. Justin Herbert, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. The only ones that really were polished in the way that we're talking about, Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence, right? Mm-hmm. And then after that, all of these guys were upside plays, were guys that, like Josh Allen, that have turned into MVP quality players that coming out of college, it was hard to see, right? And you go back and you think, is that what the Jaguars saw in Blake Bortles? Is that why they took that chance? I don't know. I don't want to say that was a good evaluation unit, so I don't want to give them too much credit. But like going back, I'm like, oh okay.
Yeah. I mean, Will Levis could be like, I'm not saying he's going to be as good as Justin Herbert, but he could be some sort of facsimile, or he could be Jake Locker. Like that's just, I don't know. Like I just genuinely don't know, and I don't know how anybody could feel that confident in knowing. And, even after they've known the guy, but without knowing the guy and the work ethic and the smarts and the football IQ and how adaptable he would be to different systems, and there's just so much unknown. I watch him in college and I watch 3 games. I'm like, there's a lot of things he's not asked to do that I have no idea if he's can do, but if he can do them, he's going to be awesome. Like, I just don't know.
Right. Yeah. Those things. There are more young quarterbacks that we're excited about that were not clean, efficient, mechanically sound, comfortable, safe passers in college, right? Then there are ones that were. Like Trevor Lawrence and Joe Burrow are kind of it. Tua, if you're high on him and comfortable that he's going to be healthy, I don't know. But like that would be the third guy, right? Yeah. Where it's like, well, he's a passer. Got it. I'm good. He can throw the ball. Yeah. And the rest of these guys are just like, man, I'm surprised that Josh Allen threw the ball with all 5 fingers. That is crazy what he is doing, right? And that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I think that's kind of like the conversation with the quarterbacks. I think it's very difficult. I didn't touch on offensive linemen. I didn't touch on safeties. We missed out on linebackers.
There's safeties in this class?
Right. 2 of the safeties that are projected to go near the top of the first round both played corner in college. So cool.
And Jair Brown from Penn State, is that his name? Did he like 4.7? What are we doing here?
It's rough. It's a rough safety class. I guess the Vikings were maybe right to draft a safety last year. Yeah. Not sure they picked the right one, but we'll see.
Lance Zierlein has Jair Brown as the second safety in the draft after Antonio Johnson. He ran a 4.65 40. Jumped 32 and a half inches and 9.11 broad.
Hey, Kyle Hamilton finished the season strong. He ran a
that's true
4.6. Yeah,
I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just like it seems like a tough class.
Yeah, the only thing that I wanted to talk about before I let you go was the defensive line group. The Northwestern guy killed it. Kalijah Kancey at the combine anyway. Kalijah Kancey did all the stuff that made all the comparisons to Aaron Donald fun. Jalen Redmond had a really good combine, but I don't know anything about him. We didn't get a ton out of the Clemson guy. We didn't get a ton out of some other guys. Obviously, couldn't get Jalen Carter to test or anything like that. Just some final thoughts on that group before we kind of bounce.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we need to probably just curb our expectations for edge rusher athletic testing. Like, I mean, our expectations should be higher. Let me put it that way. Like, because we are continuing to be shocked by athletic testing at edge rusher position for like the 5th year in a row. And it's just like, dude, at some point we got to just accept, like, these are, like,
these are the world's best athletes were recruited to play edge rusher.
Exactly right. Like, yeah, the NFL figured out about 10, 15 years ago, worked at that position, and college players were like, all right, we'll start playing this position then. And now they're playing it, and they're going to test like freaks every year. Like we added a couple years ago with that. We had that heralded edge class with Jason Away and some of those guys. And look, there's a lot more to play. It's a great starting point. I really believe it's a huge starting point. It is just a starting point. And if you don't have more in the package, you're probably going to bust in the NFL, because the reality is while you have to have it in terms of athleticism, meaning you have to have athleticism to be able to be a high end edge in the NFL, basically almost without exception, for your position. If it's all you have, you're probably going to fail. Like there's just, it is first and foremost, you are in a physical engagement with another player every single snap. You got to figure out how to win those engagements, like period. And if you can't, you are going to fail no matter how good of an athlete you are. Like there's no like cutting corners with that, in my opinion. And so I just think there's a lot of guys who are good athletes coming out of college football right now at the edge rusher position. It is not equating to a lot of good, young, promising edge rushers in the NFL. And it's not equating to a lot of good, young, promising edge rushers in each draft class either. Like we're not getting that right now. Certainly there are a few, and the draft class is big enough every year that you're going to find guys, but like, you know, Max Crosby's leaking through here as one of your top guys, you know, coming out of the last couple drafts. Like you have a lot of bust right now that look like at the top of these drafts that we've had the last couple of years. And at some point we're going to have to recalibrate here and stop getting excited about potential, because the reality, potential at wide receiver, athletic package at wide receiver, athletic package at tight end. You want to take them, you want to teach them how to be technicians. You know, I get it. Like you don't have to like physically beat another person every single play, depending on like the alignment and the coverage and all this thing. There's like room to imagine with that, right? Edge rusher, like it's like I said, it's a requirement to like as a baseline thing, but like then there is the reality that like you're going to go to war on your first snap, and like you just have to know how to win those wars. And there's just, to me, not a lot of players that know how to do that, and definitely not know how to do that in ways that track for success in the NFL. And so I am excited that there's like a lot of athletes and potential and things like that. But when I watch the tape on a lot of these guys, especially the edge rushers, I get pretty concerned that we're getting excited about another class of size, speed, testing freaks, you know, that kind of stuff, like a couple highlight reel college plays where they run over a blocker on their way to the quarterback. That's not how you see players win in the NFL. How do you see edge rushers win in the NFL? What is the primary path and primary process by which edge rushers win one-on-one exchanges as pass rushers in the NFL today? And I think by and large, you're not seeing a lot of the guys in this class. I think it's a fine class. I don't think it's this, there should be 4 guys in the top 10 type of stuff class.
Which has been a little bit of the discussion.
It has. It's absolutely been. It's been in some of these mocks that I started checking out this past week. And I'm like, to me, that just feels like we're overshooting it on this class, which we did in projecting the 2021 class, I believe it was. And then it turned out they all went at the end of the first round rather than earlier in the first, where some of them were anticipated. But I think we could be setting ourselves up for some disappointment again with this class.
All right. You mentioned in our pre-show discussion that you would plug your podcast and your Substack. You have failed to do that. Do you want to do that now?
I'm very bad representative of my own work. Audibles Analytics, Substack, just doing this stuff on the side now, having a lot of fun with it. Talking, it's usually putting out 2 or 3 pods a week. Pretty much all the pods are talking draft now. Ollie Connolly and I podcast together once a week, and we talk about NFL stuff. We are talking about draft stuff as well. We'll probably talk about free agency stuff, news in the NFL. A lot of that we'll talk about trades. All that kind of stuff will be coming down the pike. We're podcasting on Thursday about the quarterbacks in this class, so we'll go in pretty depth about the top 4 guys. And then Rashad McGinnis and I podcast once a week as well together about draft stuff. We're fully draft focused, and he is both those dudes are unbelievable. I'm super lucky to have two great co-hosts for that kind of stuff. And then I will jump on sometimes and do some quick Bucks pods and some quick Steelers mini pods, things like that. Because a lot of my subscribers are those fan bases. But if you like draft stuff, I'm also writing scouting reports on tons of the top players in the class. I already have probably 25 up on the site, and you can check those out. My scouting notes, thoughts, projections, NFL comps, things like that. But Audibles and Analytics Substack, it's like $5 a month if you want to do it monthly, or it's like $4.17 a month if you want to do the yearly $50 rate. So yeah, it's we have a lot of fun with it. So if you're looking for some more good NFL content, check it out and let me know what you think.
Cool. Cannot wait for you to write about cornerbacks.
It's coming this week. I'll have the next 3 pods with Sean and I we're going to do corners.
Wow, I picked you at the perfect time then, huh?
Absolutely, just absolute airball by you.
One in a series of many. Thanks for coming on, man. You can find him at Ledger NFL Draft on Twitter. Don't know why you're on Twitter. Please log off.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can find him at his Substack or at the Audibles and Analytics terrible name for a podcast. Audibles and Analytics name podcast. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's go to the mailbag. And the first question is from Jack. If we're going running back by committee, do we bring in 2 free agent running backs like, say, McKinnon and Latavius Murray?
They are both on the market. Also, should be noted that Mike Boone is also on the market, as is Amir Abdullah. You could have an all former Vikings running back committee. That's certainly potentially in the offing. Right?
I like how there's a ring in between them all.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, McKinnon's got a ring.
Yeah. Love that for McKinnon. You could bring a ring to Minnesota.
God. On a separate note, do you think Anthony Barr and Kendricks will end up on the same team post free agency?
That would be so nice. That'd be such a storybook situation, but probably not. For that, a team would need 2 linebackers and also sign them in free agency as opposed to draft one. That seems pretty unlikely. And Anthony Barr played a backup-ish role last year, so I guess not, but that seems pretty unlikely.
Yeah, it'd have to be something in a situation involving Cleveland. You'd have to have emotional ties involving Cleveland, the coach, all of that.
Yeah.
Bill Botke asks, it looks like the Vikings will have little chance of getting one of the top 4 quarterbacks in the draft unless they trade into the top 10. Are there any remaining quarterbacks interesting enough to take with a trade down, if the goal is to end up with an eventual replacement for Kirk Cousins?
Personally, I don't think so, but I don't think that matters. What, and some of this relates to the conversation I just had with John, which is that we know less about quarterbacks than any other position, so we might as well, take some dart throws, at least from the media side of it. Teams seem to do a better job than outside analysts, which seems like a no-duh proposition, but is kind of not true at some of these other positions, right? And so I would say that I don't think that Hendon Hooker is a very good prospect for this kind of thing. I think Tanner McKee is a very good prospect for this kind of thing. But I would say whatever, and still probably think it would be smart to draft them, right? I don't think the Vikings were wrong to draft a quarterback when they drafted Kellen Mond. They just drafted the wrong guy, and I don't know who the right guy is. But having a developmental guy is a good move, right? Because if he turns out to be a starting quality player, now you don't have to worry about extending Kirk Cousins a 5th time or whatever, right? And you've got a starting quality player on a cheaper contract. You can surround that guy with a lot of talent. And then you could trade Kirk Cousins away if he's still under contract, right? There's a lot of things that go right in a very big way. And the thing that goes wrong is basically the same thing that happened with Andrew Booth. You just don't get value out of your 2nd round pick. Okay, the floor is the same, right? The floor is the same regardless. You miss on a pick, but the ceiling is enormous, right? And so, yeah, I don't like Hendon Hooker. I don't like Tanner McKee. I don't like some of these other quarterbacks that people have been talking about. But whatever. I don't think that they're very interesting. I think Hendon Hooker played in a fake offense at Tennessee. He's a much older prospect. He didn't play very well at Virginia Tech. He was benched. It's not like a Joe Burrow where the guy got benched and he was so good that he could win a national championship. Tennessee played well, but not in a pro-style offense, right? And so there's a lot you're still asking questions about. But hey, maybe I'm wrong about all of that. Certainly he seems like a great guy. Get him anyway. I don't know.
Next question is going to be from Paul, who asks, does the quality of prospects drop significantly from 23 to, say, the low to mid-30s, that it would make more sense for the Vikings not to trade down and accumulate more picks? Also, how accurate do you consider PFF's big board rankings?
I would say PFF takes more chances than a lot of big boards that I accumulate together. Their hit rate still seems to be fairly high. And I say still because the consensus big board, when compared to all of the boards that comprise it, is generally speaking the most accurate. In any individual year, it tends to finish it always finishes basically in the top 5. It tends to finish in the top 3. In some years it wins, but over the course of several years, it is the best at projecting player outcomes. It's like a wisdom of the crowds thing. I think that's really cool that it plays out in this capacity. And so that's why I say relatively speaking. So the thing that's interesting is that when you deviate in a big way from the consensus big board, you're more likely to be wrong than right. That's just the way it is. A bunch of analysts looked at the same player you did and they disagreed. You're probably wrong. That's fine. Take chances. That's like a whole part of the process. But PFF, which tends to diverge more than the average board does, also tends to hit higher than the average board. So in this sense, I do consider the PFF board accurate in predicting player outcomes when it disagrees with the general consensus compared to other boards when they disagree with the general consensus. But that doesn't mean they're usually right. No one is usually right when they disagree. So that is kind of the way that you should view it. In terms of predicting the draft, no, they're not very good at that. And that's because they diverge from the consensus in a big way. That's fine. Their goal is not to predict the draft. So, so that answers the PFF question. As for the quality of the prospect dropping off significantly from 23 to the low to the mid 30s, I would say based off of what I know, based off of accumulating all these boards and seeing where the variances are, where the cliffs are, where the agreements are, and what little work I've done on the players now that I've gotten a good understanding of kind of what the metrics are, who the players that are kind of interesting to talk about, now that I've been able to watch some of these players, I would say that this is a year where that is something you have to be more concerned about. I think that it is not a linear drop in talent from 23 to the 30s, nor is it flat. I think it is closer to a cliff. And so I think that is something that I wouldn't necessarily entertain unless I really wanted a first round pick receiver, right? And John and I talked about that a little bit, about those receivers that might cluster around the top of the second, bottom of the first. That would be interesting, right? If you want your Zay Flowerses and your Josh Downses and your Jalen Hyatses, that'd probably be the area that you grab those guys. But at cornerback, where the Vikings' greatest need is, and they don't have to get a guy in the first round at corner, right? This is a very deep cornerback class, and we know time and again that teams will often ignore their biggest need in the first round of the draft, address it later in the draft, and be perfectly fine. That is a normal thing. So they don't have to address it. But if they want to get a corner in the first round, that's the most common way of dealing with this issue is getting your biggest need at the most important position drafted in the first round, right? And for right now, the Vikings' biggest need is cornerback. The biggest position of need in terms of importance is cornerback. And there's a bunch of really great first-round corners. They wanted to do that. There's probably a talent drop-off at 30, or when you get to 30, from 23 to 30, where you're not going to get the same kind of quality of guy. Really deep class, really good corners throughout it. But I would say that the first-round crop that John and I were discussing, people like Deonte Banks, people like, Joey Porter, Christian Gonzalez are probably not going to be there. Never say never. Xavier Rhodes wasn't supposed to be there. But probably, I shouldn't say Xavier Rhodes. Sharif Floyd wasn't supposed to be there. are probably not going to be there, but keep that in mind. But like when you get away from Keely Ringo and Deontay Banks and Cam Smith, then you're having a conversation about the 166-pound corner I was talking about, trying to figure out if that's going to work for you. And for me, or Clark Phillips, and seeing if you want a guy that's basically probably going to be a slot-only guy, but only played outside in college. Like, those are first-round quality guys. Those are really good players. Well, I don't know about the 166-pound guy, but, some of these players are quite good, but there's just a huge difference between them and the tier above them. And that tier probably, John is predicting quite possibly a run of corners starting around the mid-teens. Maybe one or two kind of go before, like the Lions could draft Christian Gonzalez, for example. But like, you're going to get an edge rusher and a defensive tackle in the top 5. Probably depends on how the Jalen Carter situation resolves itself. 3 of those quarterbacks are probably going to be in the top 5. And then in the next 5, before you get to 10, it's probably going to be a quarterback and 2 other edge rushers and maybe a defensive tackle. And that's when the cornerback run starts. And so you're going to get some really high quality guys throughout that process. And I don't know that that's going to be there for you at the 30s. So I would say for the Vikings needs, this is one of the few situations where I say probably don't trade down.
Let's go to our next question from Loyal Stooge, who asks, we often hear it's a business when well-liked players are let go. Are players ever retained for business reasons, example, fan engagement, merchandise sales, in spite of their contributions in terms of wins and losses? Quick follow-up, and if so, do these business factors enter the personnel process? Or is it just an owner putting their foot down for a player? Or is there a more sophisticated process by which the business and marketing staff get to have their input as well?
Short answer, no. There's no business-oriented reason related to marketing, ticket sales, etc., relating to players and their being let go. Long story is kind of, but not really. So marketing, all of that group of people, they have no input in front office decisions, period. There's a lot of discussion about like, hey, they drafted this guy because you can sell seats. That's not really the case. You would not be able to retain any coaches, almost period, any high-level coaches, if you were the first team to say, hey, before you cut this player, could you talk to marketing? Can you imagine Mike Zimmer? Like, that would not fly. And that's an extreme scenario, right? Like, you're probably going to leave with, like, a couple of your bobbleheads torn off, right? But, like, famously, I guess. But, like, most coaches would just not stand for that. And that's probably fine because teams do a very good job marketing the team. The players, it's incumbent upon them to make themselves marketable. Teams will help, but the players are either marketable or they're not, and the teams don't really leverage that a ton because the team branding is very important. And also, there's a perception, true or not, that winning drives income much more than anything else. If you've got a popular player that loses, you make less money than if you don't have any popular players and you win, right? And that's most of it. I will say, though, ownership does intervene, but owners are kind of more like fans than they are like attempting to make money off of a player, generally speaking. A good example of this is when Ben McAdoo benched Eli Manning. He was right. Eli Manning was playing awfully. They might as well see what they had in the backup quarterback. That might have been Geno Smith. Just,
It was, yeah.
Incredible. So he was super right, I guess. Like, extremely more right than we could have imagined, right? And that got him fired. The New York media hated it. Eli Manning's a legend. Ownership hated it. And when ownership hates a huge decision that you make, you're gone, right? You got fired, Eli Manning becomes the starter again. The Giants continue to lose more games, right? That's kind of a similar thing. And owners can be sensitive to public relations stuff. So they might have a conversation with the general manager about like, hey, I know we're in the Deshaun Watson race, or I know that we're thinking about being in the Deshaun Watson race. here's my input. And their input is very typically not a moral input. They don't typically say, I am ethically opposed to having Deshaun Watson on my team. Would have been nice, right? But typically it's, I don't know that we can sustain the public relations disaster involved here. And that is kind of a marketing decision. But for the most part, it doesn't really play a huge role. I would say 99.9% of cases, you don't get that. Like Chad Greenway was kept on the roster. He's a very popular player, but he wasn't kept on the roster because he's popular, because he sells tickets, because you can put his face on the season ticket package and outside the stadium. He's kept on the roster because he's a leader, right? And the locker room respects him and he knows the defense, right? That was why. It just happened to be that he also still wasn't very good at football. But there were football reasons to keep him. That's not really how a lot of this operates.
I appreciate you going back to the hits. Every once in a while, it's just good to hear.
Have to.
Good to hear the hits. Sammy asks, question about the NFLPA. If the NFL is the most popular sport in the country, then why does it have a comparably weaker labor union? In light of the recent quality of life survey, is this a good opportunity to assert solidarity for some organizations' lack of good facilities? Also, if Luke Braun were to indeed eat paint, what color would it be?
Luke Braun would eat purple paint. That's easy. Done. So for the, I did tell Luke Braun to eat lead paint. Because he said hi to me. I didn't really appreciate that kind of behavior.
Meanwhile, everyone else on the internet said hi, and you were totally fine with it for the most part.
For the most part.
Yeah.
Kist also said hi. I was not a huge fan of that either. But okay, so the short answer to your question about how the NFLPA is weak, despite the NFL being an immensely popular product, is that's just not how that works. It isn't. The strength of your industry does not determine the strength of your labor movement by any reasonable means. I don't know how else. Like coal mining, very important to American industry, famously was difficult to organize, right? Like that just kind of didn't matter, right? Like the things that matter are things like player leverage, the strength of the labor laws that you have, the culture surrounding labor organizing in the industry that you're in, which, I mean, there's like, how is that culture produced? There's a long history that will go into that. But like, you know, kind of all of those things, you know, the ability to have solidarity, the ability to withstand within that industry, you know, a strike if that needs to happen, right? And all of those things kind of work against the NFL in one way or the other. One kind of reason that the NBA has a stronger labor movement is A, the individual players matter more to their team, and so it's harder to break the union. B, the individual players also are just better at PR because they're marketed better because you get to see their faces for the full 48 minutes that you watch them play. For football, that's not the case. Football, the players have, I just mentioned this, the players have to be marketed individually and separately and have to create their own brand outside of the field, right? Like Odell Beckham had some help with that catch, but Odell Beckham had to be marketable for a lot of reasons outside of that, right? That's part of it, right? Also, if the NBA has a lockout, they can play in China, right? They can play in Turkey, they can play in Italy, they can play in Greece, they can play in France, right? If the NBA has a lockout, they can play elsewhere. If baseball players have a lockout, a little bit harder, but they can play in Japan, right? Like they're like if a lockout or a strike occurs, they have the ability to sustain that by playing elsewhere. And the players will make less money, but they'll continue to live and continue to have money. The owners are the ones losing the money. The NHL, somewhat similar. They kind of have the weakest product out of all four of these. They kind of don't have the strongest union in the world, but it's stronger than the NFL union because they can play in Russia. They can play in Sweden. They can play elsewhere. They can play Canada, kind of. I say kind of because like the NHL, Canada is still like, you know, but you know, I imagine any pickup hockey game in Canada would be gangbusters without the NHL anyway. So they can figure it out. The NFL, the only game in town, right? And I guess now the XFL exists and the USFL kind of exist. The XFL and the USFL do not want to be what's the opposite of a strike buster, right? Like, do not want to be a labor shelter for the NFL. They would not entertain that. The XFL is attempting to curry a relationship with the NFL right now, and I believe they have one. The USFL would love to have a relationship with the NFL. They don't want the NFL to be upset with them, and that's what would happen in this case. Maybe they would take that risk to catapult themselves into contention as a league to watch. Maybe that's something, but like probably not. Would they go into the CFL? Only if the CFL relaxed its import rules, because right now the CFL can only play a certain number of American players. But like that's not the same as being able to play basketball in China. It just isn't. All of those matter. Plus, I think a fifth thing is that there is a culture of subservience is kind of the wrong word, but it's the best word I can think of right now, of the relationship that you have to the coach in football is a lot more. You sublimate your individual identity in football a lot more than you do in basketball. Maybe not so much in baseball, although probably. But like there is a level of authority that a coach has, culturally speaking, through middle school, high school, college, and the NFL that it just makes it much. There's the values that you've developed throughout the industry are in conflict with some of the values that you need in order to maintain a strong labor relationship. All of those things matter way more than whether or not the NFL makes more money than anybody else. Way more. That's just not how any of this works. Some of the most powerful industries in the United States have some of the worst labor conditions, right? Like agriculture is the most powerful industry in the United States, besides like defense spending, right? And they like famously have awful labor conditions. So that's just not how it works.
Let's go to Chris, who asks, what kind of decision would make you feel like you needed to take a darkness retreat and then come out having made no decision anyway?
Probably a very similar decision, whether or not I would, I'm at the height of my game at Pro Football Network. They've given me raise after raise after raise. And now I feel like I'm the whole company, 10 years from now, I guess. And then I just feel like maybe there's something else out there. And then I go into my darkness retreat, which I guess I have to do that for 4 days. I don't know. I feel like if you do it for 3 days, that's like very presumptuous and people will get very upset. So 3 is the one number that you can't do, right? Because you're comparing yourself to Jesus.
I was gonna go a different route. I was gonna say something along the lines of you can only do if you do 2, people are gonna say you quit. If you do 3, yes. Like you couldn't have done the 4th, really?
Yeah, I think the 5-day, if you can withstand it, the 5-day darkness retreat, I think is probably the ideal amount of time. I am atrociously addicted to the internet and online and the electronics associated with that. That would be pretty difficult for me. But, I carve out some time, let people know I'm not going to be around for a little bit. Probably cut off my podcast appearance on the Pat McAfee show.
Actually what should have happened is he should have done that in the dark.
I mean, that would have been amazing, honestly.
I just want to see the webcam image that comes up for that.
God. But yeah, it'd probably be a very similar decision where I have to decide whether or not to force my way. That feels like a normal business environment. That feels crazy, I guess. I didn't even like it's just like, yeah, players, that's crazy. Players are so crazy. But like, can you imagine doing that to like your job? Like, I didn't even think about that. Like, could you imagine like, hey, I got to figure out whether or not I need you to break my contract. I'm going to be out for like 5 days. You need to figure out what? You don't need to put in your 2 weeks, man. You're fine. Bye.
Yeah. It's like, I think we'll survive. You can do that on your own time. Talk to HR on your way out.
You were considering what? Okay, well, HR will email you, I promise.
Yeah. Ingram's left foot asks, why didn't we see Arif doing any cornerback drills last week? Feels like this would have brought the Pro Football Network to the prime time.
Oh, boy. Okay, so So I ran a 40-yard dash in Indianapolis. I have not shared that because, first of all, there's no, there is I don't know where the video is. Okay, I'll just tell the story. So Mark Schofield and I are watching the workouts in the stadium, which is previously never able to. But the NFL is attempting to expand the combine into an event that's very profitable. So they're allowing fans to the stadium. If they're allowing fans, they might as well allow media. Okay, fine. We're there, and we've got a reservation for Fogo de Chao afterwards. Again, another steakhouse. This is day 4, by the way, of the steakhouse retreat. But we've got and so the workouts are about to end. We're not getting anything out of it, right? Because you watch the workouts at home, they tell you immediately what speed someone ran at. We don't have that feedback. We're just kind of in the stadium watching players run, not knowing the difference between a 4.43 and a 4.48. Like, we just don't have that available to us. And so it's like not super helpful. The drills that we were watching were not remarkable because it's like they're having the defensive linemen do the wave drill, which is just not immediately easy to map on as like wide receivers doing wide receiver route running drills, right? And so we just did not get a good sense of what was going on watching everything. Fine. So we leave a little bit early before our appointment. We walk by the NFL Combine Experience, which is the fan event that they're associating with the Combine this year in order to kind of build in more money for the Combine. And, Mark and I had already said to each other, unrelated, different conversation, like a day ago, that we're never running a 40. That'd be dumb. And we look at each other, we're like, yeah, absolutely, we're not going to run this 40. But we walk through the Combine Experience because we want to kind of see what it's all about. And, they've got helmets for each team set up and there's like app integration with everything. So if we downloaded the NFL One Pass app, we'd be able to QR code and see everything that's going on. Cool. And then we see like this kid, he's like maybe 9, I don't know, race his mom. And, he wins, right? And we're like, oh, that's kind of cute. That's kind of fun. It's the only event left where like the lights are on, right? And I was like, yeah, I'm glad we're not doing that. It would suck because I would dust you, Mark. And I was just kind of like, I was saying it like it wasn't even a challenge. I was just saying it as like a matter of fact. Mark is like 12 years older than me. I thought this was like, yeah, obviously I would beat him. And he's like, really, Arif? And I was like, what? Yeah, come on, man. Are you serious? And he's like, no way would you beat me in a 40-yard dash. And you already know where this is going, right? Like, we're like, oh God, now we have to, right? Because my reality was such that Mark wouldn't be able to beat me in a 40-yard dash, much less, like that he would even challenge that assumption. And so now we're just like, all right, we got to figure this out. And I was like, man, there's no way we can resolve this argument. We have to run it if we're going to have the argument. So we set up and we run. And I know everyone knows that I'm out of shape, but like, I have to emphasize to you how incredibly out of shape I am.
Like, you feel good for maybe a stride and then it goes all the way downhill.
Yeah, like my asthma is like, whoa, what are we doing?
I didn't agree to any of this. Slow down.
And my brain is like, absolutely not. You've made your bed. Now you gotta lie in it. Otherwise, that's super embarrassing.
You're like, I've got my rescue inhaler. I'm good. I'll deal with this for the next 6 hours.
Right. It would be bad to lose after putting my ego on the line. It would be worse to give up 20 yards in a 40-yard dash. Absolutely not. That's not happening. And my body just isn't prepared to run 20 yards. It just isn't. It's a bad body. I have done that to myself, right? I see Mark pull ahead, probably around the 25, 30-yard line. And my brain is like, nope, not happening. And I hit a second gear, which is kind of cool.
I
Didn't
mean,
know I had it.
you are a shutdown corner, so it was always possible.
Yeah, this is recovery. Yeah, this is recovery speed. Absolutely. And through sheer force of ego and spite, I catch up to Mark. We tie. Worst possible outcome. Okay, if one of us wins, at least it settles the debate. If we tie, there's the remote possibility that I put my body through this again. I am heaving. Like, I am trying.
You realize this is happening next year, right? Like, this conversation will come up again.
So, okay, well, here's the problem. So as I am like bent over, head between my knees, like trying to catch my breath, trying to tell myself not to throw up after a 40-yard dash, just pathetic levels of fitness right now, right? The kid walks up to us and was like, "Hey, can I race one of you?" And my brain isn't working right now. Right? It's all of the energy is in my heart. And at the time, I'm just like, well, that's really nice. The kid just like he wants to have. It didn't occur to me until later that the kid smells blood. He saw two old MFers careen into the padding at the end of the 40-yard dash. There for children who can't stop themselves. Right? Just like absolutely bowled over. Can't breathe. The kid clearly was like, I can get another win here. Which by the way, I respect that. Absolutely do it.
Game
right?
respects game here, but
my brain did not process that. I was like, oh, he's just a kid. Like, that's so nice. He just wants to have fun. His mom's not gonna race him again. And he wants to, like, he has a lot of energy. He just wants to, and so he wants to race again. And Mark and I are just like, I don't know, man. Okay. And I thought that I agreed and that Mark would watch, and Mark thought that he agreed and that I would watch. And we both like thought that we were running and not the other one. And so we're both walking towards it. The mom pulls out her camera now, right? Or her phone, right?
Oh no. How is there more?
And Mark and I were like, oh, are we both racing? And we're like, yeah, I guess. And we look at the kid, and like, I had debated in my really not working brain on the way over there, I should probably just let the kid win. He's 9. Right? Like, I should, like, there's a possibility I won't even have to let him, right? I am beat up. This 9-year-old could absolutely destroy me, maybe, right? Like, it has not even occurred to me, right, that like it's easy to win, right? But like, I'm thinking I should probably not try so hard as to because like, who cares? It's a kid. I can always say I let him win, right? And it's very believable, right? And then Mark lines up, and I'm like, absolutely not. It's not even like I said no, I'm not going to let him win. I forgot that I was having this discussion in my brain. Like, it wasn't on the table, right? I was like, oh, okay. And I think the same thing happened to Mark, because he's like, not. And so we burst out of there and we race again. And we're going full speed for no reason. There was already no reason going in. And now there's super no reason, because that it's fine if the kid wins, right? But then I see Mark ahead of me, and my same lizard brain does the same lizard thing. And it's like, nope. And we tie again. And I forgot about the kid. And I look back, and the kid crosses the finish line. And I'm like, good for him, man. That's on video now. And I look up, and the thing flashes 454. And I'm like, that thing's a liar. No way. No way did we break 5 seconds. There's a chance we didn't break 6.
Like, it's probably closer to 6 point something. Yeah.
Right? Like, no way. That thing has been lying to kids all night? Oh my God. And And I'm like, I gotta find a way to like make the kids like, and so I just turned to the kid and I was like, oh my God, honestly, you're the real winner because we're beat up, man. We can't do anything for the rest of the night. Man, you did great out there, kid. And Mark is like saying something equally unbelievable and pointless, trying to like give this kid some confidence. Cause like, look, this bald 34-year-old that like is clearly not in shape. And this 46er, by the way, I found out afterwards that Mark was recruited to play like Division I track run Division I track. I didn't know that. That's crazy. So I feel a little bit better about tying a 46-year-old guy, especially because he like kind of maintained a fitness regimen. So I feel better about it, but he is 46. So like, come on. But like also he ran track. So, okay. Anyway, I was like, I was going to go back to my Airbnb and wait it out until we got to Fogo de Chao for the appointment for the reservation. And it was too far away. And I just walked to Mark's hotel and collapsed on his couch and I just blacked out. I don't remember. Like I just, boom, done. I wake up and I down a can of C4. And then we go to dinner. And like I was like almost throwing up. My legs were burning. I couldn't walk to dinner. We had to like use those little scooters because there was no way I was going to make it to dinner.
You know that you messed up when you can't walk to dinner.
Yeah, it's just like it's a 15-minute walk, and my body was like, "Are you kidding me? That's nope." You're not eating tonight if that's what the deal is. I almost threw up because I ran 80 yards. What is that?
I want to say that there's officially like we're ending the show here. There's nothing that can be said from this point on that's going to be any use to anybody. We're done. This is the end of the show. I very rarely cut a show in the mailbag. This is it. That is one of the funniest things I have heard in a really long time.
I tied a Division I athlete in track. That's all. That's what
and you beat a kid in a non-violent way.
Oh, come on. You didn't need to say it like that.
I was not trying to say that. That just kind of happened. Arif, what do you have to plug? Who cares?
Not my fitness.
Who knows? Yeah, not your fitness.
I wrote some articles at Pro Football Network. Lamar Jackson, Daniel, just some stuff. You know, it's over there.
That is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. We hope you have enjoyed Arif's tale of winning a race against a kid, at least. And tying here.
I won in spirit against Mark. I'll say that.
Yeah.
Just let me have this, man.
I'm not going to argue with somebody who ran 80 yards in Indianapolis. I know better than that because I know that it would go far worse for me. And I'm actively working out and like trying to lose weight. So like, I'm not here to judge you. However, it would go poorly if I was going to try half of what you did. Like my back would have exploded. All right. Let's be clear. I would absolutely be in worse shape after that. However, for Arif and his amazing abilities,
I ran a 4.54, James. You remember that?
Yeah, I'm sure that sign wasn't digital at all. I'm sure it was just like a placard that said 4.54 on it. But sure, if that makes you feel better, if that made you feel better as you had to take a scooter to dinner, then fine. Go for it. The show is completely off the rails. We're ending here. For Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember to make sure you have a scooter just in case you need to go to dinner. And we'll be back soon. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of Pro Football Network, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagoshnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.